The singed flesh of 1,000,000 dead Rizians still haunted Isaac Green's every waking moment. 10 years after leading the 3rd Terran Assault Wing to a decisive victory over the Rizian Dominion in the First Rizian War, Isaac found himself staring down their delegation to the Galactic Council. Hatred simmered behind the black, soulless eyes of Councillor Vortis, his scaled hide pulled taut as he jabbed a clawed finger at the human. The treaty is clear. Humanity's expansion into the Cerberus sector violates the terms of our peace. This cannot stand. Mutters of assent rippled through the council chamber. The Corva, Elzanti and Gillen had all suffered humiliating defeats at the hands of the upstart Terrans. With all due respect, Councillor, the worlds we've settled were lifeless rocks. The treaty grants humanity the right to expand to any uninhabited systems, Isaac shot back. You may render them habitable, but that gives you no right to them, Vortis spat. Your species is a plague upon this galaxy. Isaac slammed a fist on the podium. If the Council has an issue with our expansion, you're welcome to settle those worlds yourselves, but we both know you won't. It's easier to let humanity do the hard work, then swoop in and take what you never earned. Vortis sucked in breath to retort, but a frantic aide appeared at his shoulder, whispering urgently in his ear. The councillor's eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed to slits. It seems humanity's sins are greater than we realized. The chamber holodisplay flared to life, showing a monstrous human warship drop out of warp at the bustling council trade hub in the Kythos system. Even from here, Isaac could see it dwarfed the largest Rizian battlecruisers. His breath caught in his throat as a blinding lance of energy erupted from the Dreadnought's main gun, slicing through the defenseless station like a fusion torch through butter. In a second, 35,000 lives were snuffed out. The Dreadnought fired again and again, methodically picking off fleeing trade ships as it went. Isaac's heart seized in his chest. This was an act of war, an unprovoked strike on civilians on a scale not seen since the Purge of Jericho. Humanity's enemies on the Council would flay them alive for this. And as the sole human delegate, surrounded by the vengeful survivors of the species his people had all but broken, Isaac wasn't sure he'd make it out of this room alive. The council chamber erupted into pandemonium as the holodisplay showed the monstrous human dreadnought effortlessly shrugging off the trade hub's meager defenses. Stunned delegates shouted over each other, demanding answers. Isaac, his own shock quickly giving way to confusion and outrage, pressed a finger to his earcom. "Admiralty, what the hell is going on?" he barked. "The Retribution is attacking a civilian target." That civilian target was a front for a secret Rizian bioweapons lab, a gravelly female voice responded. It was Admiral Veronica Stark, commander of the human fleet. They were developing a virus specifically designed to target human physiology. "What? How do you know this?" "We warned them to cease all bioweapons research after the last war. They didn't listen," Stark growled. "Our intel confirmed they were violating the treaty. I'm transmitting the proof now." Isaac's wrist computer pinged as it received a data packet. He quickly skimmed the documents and video logs, his eyes widening at the damning evidence. Rizian scientists, gloating over a weaponized virus that would bring humanity to its knees. "This is a declaration of war," Stark declared, her voice hard as steel. "The Retribution will defend humanity no matter the cost." Isaac turned back to the chaotic council chamber, his fury rising. The Rizians had been plotting humanity's downfall, even as they accused them of warmongering. "This attack was justified," Isaac roared over the clamor. The chamber fell into a stunned silence. "The Rizians have been developing bioweapons to use against humanity. We have proof." He transmitted the evidence to the council's holodisplay. Vortis recoiled as if struck, before quickly regaining his composure. "Lies," he blustered. "This so-called proof is clearly fabricated." "If you're so certain, I invite the Council to inspect the wreckage for themselves," Isaac challenged. "See the truth with your own eyes." On the holodisplay, the Retribution, its grim task complete, vanished into the swirling vortex of a hyperspace jump. The Elzanti delegate turned to his peers, his face pale. "I've never seen a ship that size before," he said quietly. "If the humans have more of those, what chance do we have against them?" Light years away, in the heart of human space, Admiral Stark stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the Retribution's successful attack. Her face was etched with grim determination as she turned to her crew. "Put the fleet on full alert," she ordered. "The Council will retaliate for this. We must be ready for the coming storm." As the Council dissolved into squabbling over how to respond to the Retribution's devastating strike, Isaac felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. His wrist computer pinged with an urgent encoded transmission. It was from Admiral Stark. "Isaac, we've got a serious problem," Stark said, her voice tight with tension. "Our intelligence network just uncovered evidence that the Risians are rallying the other Council races for a massive first strike against our core worlds. They're going to try to cripple our infrastructure and industry in one decisive blow." Isaac's blood ran cold. If the Risians succeeded, it would be a catastrophe for humanity. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Not long. A matter of days at most. I need you to stall the Council, buy us time to mobilize our defenses." Isaac's mind raced. He needed a plan, and fast. He raised his voice, cutting through the din of arguing delegates. "Councillors, please, I have a proposal." The chamber fell into an uneasy silence. Isaac took a deep breath. Humanity will submit to a full Council investigation to prove beyond doubt that the Risian bioweapons program existed. In return, the Council will agree not to retaliate for the destruction of the trade hub until the investigation is complete. Vortis leapt to his feet, scales rippling with rage. "Outrageous! You cannot seriously expect us to—" "I second the proposal," the Corva delegate said suddenly. Isaac blinked in surprise. The Corva were the Risians' biggest rivals for influence on the Council. They were seizing the chance to gain an advantage. The Elzanti and Gillan delegates glanced at each other uncertainly. Neither wanted to be seen as the aggressor. "We agree to these terms," the Elzanti delegate said finally. Vortis looked around in disbelief, but he was overruled. He sat back down, seething. Isaac allowed himself a small sigh of relief. It wasn't much, but he'd bought humanity a little precious time. As the Council meeting broke up, a hooded figure approached Isaac. "Delegate Green, a word, if you please." Isaac tensed, but followed the figure into a quiet alcove. The figure lowered his hood, revealing the chiseled features of an Elzanti male. "I am Zorrox, a high-ranking officer in the Elzanti military." "What do you want?" Isaac asked warily. "To help you." Zorrox glanced around before continuing in a low voice. "Many in my government are uneasy with the Risians' aggressive stance and our alliance with them. I can feed you information about the Council's military preparations and plans." Isaac hesitated. It could be a trap, but if it was genuine, this intel could be invaluable. "All right," he said finally, "I'll accept your help, but if your information is false—" He let the threat hang in the air. "Understood." Zorrox melted back into the shadows as quietly as he'd appeared. Light years away, Admiral Stark stood on the bridge of the Retribution as the rest of the human Dreadnought fleet assembled around the massive warship. Holograms of the fleet's captains and commanders hovered before her. "You all know what's at stake," Stark said grimly. "The survival of our species, our worlds, our families." She met each of their gazes in turn. "We will not let the Council strike first. Here's the plan." The fate of humanity hung in the balance as both sides prepared for total war. There would be no quarter given, no mercy shown. Only one side would emerge victorious, and the other would be consigned to the ashes of history. Isaac's wrist computer chimed with an incoming message. He ducked into an alcove and tapped the screen. Zorrox's face appeared, his expression grave. "The Risians have planted false evidence at the trade hub ruins," the Elzanti operative said urgently. "They mean to frame humanity for the bioweapons program." Isaac's heart raced. "Can you prove this?" "Not yet. But you must find a way to expose the truth before the Council investigation condemns your species. The transmission cut out. Isaac immediately contacted Admiral Stark. "The Rizians are trying to set us up," he said without preamble. "We need to get to that evidence before the Council does." Stark's jaw tightened. "I'll send in Reyes and his team. They'll find out what the lizards are up to." On the edge of the Kethos system, a stealth shuttle detached from a human frigate and glided toward the ruined trade hub. Inside, Captain Marcus Reyes and his squad checked their weapons. "We get in, find the evidence, and get out," Reyes said. "Quick and quiet. The Council can't know we were here." The shuttle docked with the Council investigation ship. Reyes and his team slipped aboard, moving silently through the corridors. But as they neared the lab where the evidence was being analyzed, a Rizian guard spotted them. "Intruders!" he shouted, reaching for his sidearm. Reyes put a pulse round through his skull before he could draw, but the damage was done. Alarms blared as more Rizian guards converged on their position. "So much for quick and quiet," Reyes muttered. "Push forward to the lab, don't let them box us in." A fierce firefight erupted in the tight confines of the ship. Reyes and his team advanced relentlessly, cutting down Rizians with precise bursts of gunfire. They burst into the lab, only to find Councillor Vortis himself standing over the collected evidence. The Rizian's eyes glittered with malice. "You're too late, humans," he sneered. "The Council will see your duplicity laid bare. Your species will be branded as warmongers and liars." Reyes leveled his rifle at Vortis. "Step away from the evidence, Councillor." Vortis laughed. "You wouldn't dare harm me. It would mean war." "War is coming anyway, thanks to you," Reyes growled. He lunged forward, grabbing Vortis and pressing his gun to the Rizian's head. "Everyone back," he barked at the terrified Council scientists. "Give me the data on the investigation, now." Vortis struggled, but Reyes's grip was iron. The scientists, their hands shaking, transferred the data to a portable drive. Reyes snatched it and shoved Vortis away. "Fall back to the shuttle," he ordered his team. They fought their way back through the ship, Reyes dragging a cursing Vortis along as a shield. They piled into the shuttle and rocketed away, leaving a furious Vortis and a squad of shocked Rizian guards in their wake. "Isaac, we've got the evidence," Reyes transmitted. "Uploading it to you now." In the council chamber, Isaac strode forward and slammed the data onto the central dais. "Esteemed delegates, I present to you the true face of the Rizian Dominion," he declared. The data played across the chamber's hollow screens. Rizian agents, planting the bioweapons evidence at the trade hub, fabricated documents implicating human scientists, intercepted transmissions between Vortis and his co-conspirators, gloating over their plan to turn the Council against humanity. Shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Corva delegate shot to his feet. "This is an outrage," he shouted. "The Rizians have manipulated this council for too long. I call for an immediate suspension of the investigation and a full inquiry into these allegations." The Jilin delegate, her crest quivering with anger, seconded the motion. One by one, the other races voiced their assent. Only the Elzanti delegate abstained after a long, tense pause. Vortis, his scheme unraveling before his eyes, slammed his fist on his podium. "No, you cannot do this. The humans are the real enemy." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The vote passed, and the investigation into the human strike was halted. As news of the Rizian plot spread, cracks began to appear in the Council's once unified front. Some factions argued for allying with humanity against Rizian aggression. Others remained committed to containing human expansion, even if it meant siding with the Rizians. The stage was set for a conflict that would test the alliance like never before. And humanity, once the Council's greatest adversary, now found itself poised to become the galaxy's unlikely savior, or its ultimate conqueror. Vortis raged as he watched the Galactic Council fracture before his eyes. The Rizians' grand plan to turn the galaxy against humanity lay in ruins, exposed by that cursed human delegate and his upstart species. But Vortis refused to accept defeat. If the Council would not stand against the humans, then the Rizians would do it alone. Admiral Zarin mobilized the fleet, Vortis hissed into his communicator. We strike at the heart of their expansion, New Horizon. The Rizian warfleet, dozens of ships strong, dropped out of hyperspace on the fringes of the New Horizon system. The human mining colony hung vulnerably in space, its meager defenses woefully unprepared for the onslaught to come. On the bridge of his flagship, the RSS Imperator Vortis allowed himself a predatory grin. Begin the attack. Rizian ships swept forward, their guns hammering the human defensive platforms. The outmatched human ships fought back bravely, but were swiftly overwhelmed by the sheer number of attackers. Dropships full of Rizian troops descended on the colony's surface, disgorging soldiers into the streets and habitation domes. The Rizians showed no mercy, gunning down fleeing civilians and demolishing buildings with cold efficiency. In the colony's command center, Governor Eliza Reeves watched in horror as the Rizians slaughtered her people. She slammed her hand on the distress beacon, sending out a desperate plea for help, before the room shook with an explosion and went dark. Light years away, Admiral Stark's face hardened as she received the colony's distress call. She turned to her bridge crew with steel in her eyes. Battle stations, we're going in. The Retribution and its accompanying dreadnoughts tore through hyperspace, racing toward New Horizon. They emerged from the swirling vortex to find the colony ablaze, Rizian ships swarming over its burning husk. On the Retribution's bridge, Captain Nolan Garrett wasted no time. All forward batteries, open fire, carve us a path to the colony. The Dreadnought's massive guns roared to life, spitting streams of superheated plasma into the Rizian fleet. Vortis's ships returned fire, but their weapons splashed harmlessly off the Retribution's thickly armored hull. Garrett watched with grim satisfaction as Rizian ships crumpled and burst under his guns. Prep drop pods, our Marines are going in. On the surface, Rizian soldiers marched through the blasted ruins of a once thriving human city. Smoke choked the air, and rubble crunched beneath their boots. Suddenly, drop pods screamed down from the sky, smashing into buildings and roads. Human Marines spilled out, their weapons already blazing. A fierce street battle erupted as the humans clashed with the Rizian invaders. Marines took cover in shattered storefronts and burnt-out vehicles, trading fire with Rizian soldiers entrenched in the ruins. In the chaos, a squad of Marines fought their way to the colony's command center. They found Governor Reeves and her staff barricaded inside, defiantly holding out against the Rizians. "It's about damn time you showed up," Reeves growled, snatching up a rifle and joining the Marines as they pushed out into the battle-torn streets. Say above, the space battle raged on as human and Rizian ships dueled amidst the tumbling wreckage of destroyed vessels. The Retribution surged through the heart of the enemy fleet, its guns never falling silent. On the ship's bridge, Captain Garrett gritted his teeth as a Rizian cruiser unloaded a broadside into their shields. The bridge shook and sparks flew from overloaded consoles, but the Dreadnought held strong. Garrett locked eyes with his gunnery officer. "Concentrate fire on that cruiser. Blow it out of the sky." The Retribution's guns bellowed in response, and the Rizian cruiser vanished in a blinding fireball. In the council chambers, Isaac watched the holo displays with a mix of dread and grim anticipation. New Horizon burned, and humanity's fate hung by a thread. Then a glimmer of hope. The Corva and Gillen delegates rose, declaring their withdrawal from the Council and their neutrality in the conflict. They would not stand with the Rizians. And then, incredibly, a message from Zorux. The Elzanti were offering covert aid to the humans in exchange for a share of the victory spoils. Isaac couldn't believe what he was hearing. He quickly relayed the news to Admiral Stark, his heart pounding. The tide was turning. Humanity might just have a chance. But on the surface of New Horizon, and in the space above, the battle still hung in the balance. Marines fought tooth and nail against the Rizian invaders, while the Retribution and its fleet dueled with Vortis's ships in a cataclysmic clash of arms. The fate of the colony, and perhaps the entire war, would be decided here and now, amidst the fire and blood of New Horizon. As the brutal ground war raged on, the tide of battle in space shifted with the sudden arrival of the Zephyrians. Captain Garrett was barking orders on the bridge of the Retribution when alarms blared. "Sir, new contacts just appeared on sensors," the tactical officer reported. "Unknown configurations, not matching anything in our databases." The viewscreen flashed as sleek predatory ships shimmered into existence, their hulls seeming to drink in the light. They wasted no time, darting towards the battered human and Rizian fleets with impossible speed. Garrett gripped the armrests of his command chair as the Zephyrian ships danced through the battle, their advanced weaponry scything through human and Rizian ships alike. The aliens were picking off damaged vessels, exploiting the chaos of the battle. Suddenly, the Retribution shuddered violently. Sparks sprayed from overloaded consoles as damage reports flooded in. "Report," Garrett shouted over the cacophony of alarms. "We've been hit, sir. Zephyrian battlecruiser decloaked right behind us. Rear armor is breached, heavy damage to engineering decks." On the surface of New Horizon, Captain Reyes dove for cover as a plasma bolt sizzled overhead, melting the wall behind him into slag. He popped up, returning fire, but his shots pinged harmlessly off the Zephyrian troopers' advanced armor. All around him, the once orderly battle had devolved into a chaotic melee as the Zephyrians pressed their attack. Human and Rizian soldiers, who just minutes before had been locked in mortal combat, now found themselves fighting side by side against this new threat. Reyes sprinted to a group of Rizian soldiers pinned down by Zephyrian fire. "We need to coordinate our defense," he shouted over the din of battle. "Focus fire on their weak points, joints, visors, anything that looks vulnerable." The Rizian sergeant, his scales slick with blood, both red and green, nodded grimly. "Agreed. For now, human, we fight as one." Back in space, the Retribution was fighting for its life. Zephyrian ships swarmed around the mighty Dreadnought, pummeling it with plasma fire. Captain Garrett knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He stared across the battlefield at the Rizian flagship, the Imperator, which was faring little better against the Zephyrian onslaught. In that moment, Garrett made a decision that would change the course of the war. "Open a channel to the Imperator," he ordered. "Audio only." There was a hiss of static, then a familiar voice filled the bridge. "This is Councillor Vortis. What do you want, human?" "Councillor, we're both getting slaughtered out here," Garrett said bluntly. "We need to join forces, at least until we deal with these Zephyrians." There was a long pause, then grudgingly, "Very well, Captain. A temporary truce until this battle is won. What do you propose?" Garrett eyed the tactical display, an idea forming. "We combine our firepower. The Retribution and the Imperator side by side punch straight for their flagship. Take out the head, and the rest will follow." "Agreed," Vortis said after a moment. "Let it be done." The two mighty dreadnoughts, battered but unbowed, swung into formation. Their guns roared in unison, a symphony of destruction, as they charged towards the massive Zephyrian flagship. The ensuing clash was titanic. The flagship's shields flared and burst under the combined human-Rizian assault, but it gave as good as it got. The Retribution and Imperator both shuddered under the fury of its advanced weaponry. Garrett watched in horror as the Imperator, its hull breached in a dozen places, began to drift, venting atmosphere and bodies. The Retribution was little better off, its once mighty armor pitted and scarred. But they had to finish this. "Ramming speed," Garrett ordered, his voice hoarse. "All hands brace for impact." The Retribution surged forward, the Zephyrian flagship looming in its viewscreen. The Dreadnought's prow, reinforced for exactly this purpose, slammed into the flagship's weakened hull at tremendous speed. Metal screamed and tore as the two giants collided. The flagship's reactor went critical, consuming both ships in a blinding flash of light. When the glare faded, the Zephyrian flagship was gone, reduced to an expanding field of debris. The Retribution was a shattered hulk, drifting lifeless in space. But the gambit had worked. With their flagship destroyed, the Zephyrian fleet fell into disarray. Some ships fled while others fought on, but without coordination, they were easy prey for the remaining human and Rizian forces. The battle was won, but the cost was immense. The once proud human and Rizian fleets were reduced to battered remnants. The surface of New Horizon was pockmarked with craters and littered with the bodies of the fallen. In the aftermath, as the survivors struggled to regroup and tend to their wounds, the scale of the Zephyrian threat became clear. This was no border skirmish, no local conflict. This was a war for survival, against an enemy that had been watching, waiting, preparing for years. Humanity and the Rizians, once bitter enemies, now found themselves facing a common foe. The future was uncertain, fraught with peril. But one thing was clear: they would have to stand together or fall alone. In the smouldering ruins of New Horizon, Isaac and Vortis stood face to face, the bitter enmity of their peoples temporarily set aside in the face of the Zephyrian threat. The human diplomat and the Rizian counselor, both battered and bloodied from the fierce battle, regarded each other warily. "The Zephyrians won't stop here," Isaac said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "They'll come for all of us, human and Rizian alike." Vortis's scales rippled with tension, but he nodded. "As much as it pains me to admit it, you're right. We must stand together or fall alone." They proposed a daring plan, a joint human-Rizian strike team, infiltrating the heart of the Zephyrian Empire to sabotage their defenses and pave the way for a massive assault. Isaac, seeing a chance to prove humanity's worth as an ally, volunteered to lead the mission himself. He handpicked his team, the best and brightest from both races. Captain Reyes, the grizzled Marine who had fought by his side on New Horizon. Zara, a lethal Rizian Special Forces operative with a reputation for cunning and ruthlessness. And a dozen others, human and Rizian, united by the common goal of survival. But as they trained and prepared, old animosities simmered beneath the surface. Humans and Rizians, after years of bitter warfare, found it difficult to trust one another. Isaac and Zara clashed repeatedly, arguing over tactics and strategy. "You humans are too reckless," Zara hissed during one particularly heated exchange. "Always charging in, guns blazing, no thought for the consequences." "And you Rizians are too cautious," Isaac shot back. "Always hiding, always plotting, never taking action until it's too late." But as they sparred and planned together, a grudging respect began to grow between them. They were more alike than they cared to admit, both driven by a fierce loyalty to their people and a stubborn refusal to back down in the face of adversity. In human space, Admiral Stark oversaw the construction of a new flagship, a mighty dreadnought christened the ISS Phoenix. It rose from the shipyards, a gleaming behemoth bristling with advanced weaponry, reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian technology. The Phoenix would lead the charge against the Zephyrian homeworld, but first Isaac's team had to pave the way. They infiltrated the Zephyrian core, the heavily defended heart of the alien empire, disguised as Zephyrian soldiers. But their cover was soon blown, and all hell broke loose. Plasma bolts filled the air as Isaac and his team fought their way through the streets of the Zephyrian capital, a running battle against hordes of snarling alien warriors. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and it seemed that their mission would end in failure and death. But just as they were about to be overrun, a massive explosion shook the city. The Phoenix had arrived, its guns blazing as it led the charge of the combined human-Rizian fleet. The sabotage mission had been a diversion all along, a ploy to draw out the Zephyrian defenses and leave their homeworld vulnerable to attack. As the battle raged in the skies above, Isaac's team fought their way to the Zephyrian power core, planting explosives to cripple the alien defenses. But they were confronted by the Zephyrian champion, a towering cybernetic warrior armed with a crackling energy glaive. Isaac and Zara leapt to meet the champion's charge, engaging the alien behemoth in a desperate hand-to-hand battle as the rest of the team raced to set the charges. The champion was immensely strong and lightning fast, a whirlwind of slashing blades and crushing blows. Isaac and Zara fought as one, their movements perfectly synchronized as they ducked and wove and struck at the aliens' weaknesses. In a climactic moment, as the explosives ticked down to detonation, Isaac and Zara landed a devastating combo attack, shattering the champion's armor and sending the alien warrior crashing to the ground. They sprinted for the exit as the charges went off, a cascading series of explosions that plunged the Zephyrian homeworld into darkness and chaos. High above the besieged Zephyrian homeworld, the ISS Phoenix surged forward, its hull shimmering with an iridescent sheen. The experimental ship's advanced weapons glowed an eerie blue as they swiveled and locked onto their targets. With a thunderous roar, the Phoenix unleashed a storm of devastation, its beams slicing through the battered Zephyrian fleet like a scythe through wheat. Around the Phoenix, Rizian warships formed a protective cordon, their crews fighting with a ferocity born of desperation and newfound respect for their human allies. The Rizians had seen the humans' valor and tenacity firsthand, and it had ignited a fire in their hearts. Together, the human Rizian fleet pushed deeper into Zephyrian space, leaving a trail of shattered enemy ships in their wake. On the war-torn surface of the Zephyrian homeworld, Isaac and his team fought their way through the rubble-choked streets. The once proud alien city lay in ruins, its towering spires reduced to jagged stumps, its broad avenues clogged with debris and the bodies of the fallen. Zephyrian soldiers, their faces contorted with rage and despair, attacked from every shadow and pile of wreckage. Isaac ducked as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head, close enough to singe his hair. He returned fire, his rifle barking as he put a burst into the chest of a charging Zephyrian. Beside him, Zara fell back with a cry, a smoking hole in her shoulder. Isaac caught her before she hit the ground, slinging her arm over his shoulders. "I've got you," he grunted, half dragging, half carrying her towards their extraction point. Zara gritted her teeth against the pain, her face pale but determined. They rounded a corner, only to find themselves face to face with a squad of Zephyrian soldiers. But these warriors weren't alone. They held a group of terrified civilian hostages in front of them like living shields. Women, children, the elderly, all trembling in the grip of their captors. "Drop your weapons or we start killing hostages," the lead Zephyrian snarled. Isaac hesitated, his finger tightening on the trigger. But as he looked into the wide, pleading eyes of a young Zephyrian girl, he knew he couldn't risk it. Slowly, he lowered his rifle to the ground, motioning for his team to do the same. As the Zephyrians moved in to secure their prisoners, a towering figure pushed through their ranks. It was Krath, the brutal Zephyrian warlord. His eyes glinted with cruel amusement as he surveyed his captives. "The great Isaac Green, hero of the human resistance," Krath sneered. "I'm going to enjoy watching you die. But first, let's make an example of you in front of your little friends here." He gestured to his soldiers. "Line them up for execution. The human goes first." Isaac was shoved roughly against a wall, the barrels of a dozen Zephyrian rifles pointed at his chest. He stared defiantly into Krath's eyes, refusing to give the warlord the satisfaction of seeing his fear. Just as the Zephyrians were about to pull their triggers, the sky above them erupted with blinding light. The ground shook as a barrage of orbital strikes rained down around them, vaporizing the Zephyrian soldiers where they stood. The Phoenix had entered low orbit, its guns hammering the Zephyrians' positions in a devastating show of close air support. In the chaos, Isaac and his team sprang into action. They scooped up fallen Zephyrian weapons and battled their way to the huddled group of hostages. "Go, go!" Isaac yelled, ushering the civilians to safety as his team laid down covering fire. They fought their way to a nearby landing pad, where a Zephyrian transport ship sat unguarded. Piling aboard, Isaac took the controls and rocketed into the sky, leaving the burning city behind. As they docked with the Phoenix, Isaac could see that the tide of the space battle had turned decisively in the human-Rizian alliance's favor. The Zephyrian fleet was in full retreat, their ships fleeing before the relentless onslaught of the Phoenix and its escorts. But on the bridge of his crippled flagship, Krath seethed with rage and humiliation. He would not allow his people to suffer the disgrace of defeat. If the Zephyrians could not have victory, then they would have vengeance. "Activate the Doomsday device," he ordered, his voice cold with finality. Deep beneath the surface of the Zephyrian homeworld, an ancient machine stirred to life. It was a relic of a bygone age, a planet killer of unimaginable power. Its energy readings spiked off the scale as it began to power up, preparing to unleash an apocalyptic blast that would reduce the Zephyrian homeworld to molten slag and take the human Rizian fleet with it. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark paled as the sensors detected the massive energy surge from the planet below. "All ships, emergency full retreat," she barked, her knuckles white on the arms of her command chair. "Get us out of here now." But Isaac, still planetside in the captured transport, knew that retreat was not an option. The Doomsday device had to be stopped at the source, or billions would die. He exchanged a long, meaningful look with Zara, seeing his own determination reflected in her eyes. "We have to go back," Isaac said quietly. "We're the only ones who can stop that thing." Zara nodded grimly. "Then let's finish this together." As the battered human Rizian fleet fled to the safety of hyperspace, Isaac and a small team of volunteers, humans and Rizians united by a common purpose, steered their transport back towards the roiling clouds that marked the location of the Doomsday device. They sat down on a rocky plain, the wind whipping at their faces as they disembarked. In the distance, a massive blast door set into the mountainside marked the entrance to the Doomsday device's control center. They fought their way inside, a running battle against the elite Zephyrian guards tasked with defending the installation. The corridors rang with the clash of weapons fire and the cries of the wounded and dying. Finally, they stood before the towering form of the Doomsday device itself. It pulsed with malevolent energy, its power core thrumming like the heartbeat of an angry god. Isaac and his team fanned out, planting explosive charges at key structural points. They worked quickly, knowing that every second brought the device closer to unleashing its full destructive potential. But as they prepared to make their escape, a cold voice echoed through the chamber. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Krath stepped from the shadows, flanked by his personal guard. The Zephyrian warlord's face was twisted with hatred and a kind of madness. "If my world must die, then I will have the satisfaction of taking you with it." What followed was a brutal, desperate battle in the heart of the Doomsday device. Isaac and his team fought with everything they had, driven by the knowledge that the fate of billions rested on their shoulders. One by one, Isaac's companions fell, until only he and Zara were left, blood-soaked and exhausted, standing back to back amidst a ring of Zephyrian corpses. Krath himself lay dead at their feet, cut down by Isaac's blade in a final, furious melee. But there was no time to savor their victory. The timer on the explosives was ticking down, and the Doomsday device was shuddering and bucking as its power core began to overload. Isaac and Zara shared one final look, a wealth of understanding and respect passing between them in that instant. There was no need for words. They both knew what had to be done. As the explosives detonated and the Doomsday device began to tear itself apart, Isaac and Zara charged forward into the maelstrom, their weapons blazing. They would fight to their last breath, taking as many of the enemy with them as they could. It was a warrior's death, a death with purpose and honor. And so, as the Doomsday device exploded in a cataclysmic blast that shook the very foundations of the planet, Isaac and Zara stood tall amongst the flames, defiant to the end. As the blinding flash of the superweapon's detonation faded, the bridge of the Phoenix fell into a stunned silence. On the view screen, the Zephyrian homeworld burned, its atmosphere choked with ash and debris. Admiral Stark gripped the arms of her command chair, her knuckles white. She knew that Isaac and his team had been down there, at the epicenter of the blast. There was no way they could have survived. "Admiral, we're picking up a signal from the surface," the Cormems officer reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's a human distress beacon." Stark's head snapped up, hope warring with dread in her chest. "Send a rescue team now." The dropship plunged through the turbulent atmosphere, buffeted by the shockwaves still rippling from the explosion. It touched down on a blasted plain, the ruins of the superweapons control room looming in the distance. The search team picked their way through the rubble, their suit lights casting eerie shadows in the gloom. Suddenly, a shout echoed over the comms. "We've got survivors!" In a small, reinforced bunker, half buried in the debris, they found Isaac and Zara. They were badly injured, their armor scorched and dented, but alive. The rest of their team hadn't been so lucky. As the medics worked to stabilize them for transport back to the Phoenix, Isaac gripped Zara's hand. "We did it," he whispered through cracked lips. "We bought them the time they needed." But even as the rescue team lifted off, carrying the wounded heroes back to the fleet, the true extent of the Zephyrian plan became clear. Long-range sensors picked up a massive energy surge from just outside the system. The detonation of the superweapon had been a signal. A clarion call to a hidden Zephyrian armada waiting in the wings. Thousands of ships, each one bristling with advanced weapons and shielding, began to pour into the system, descending on the battered human Rizian fleet like wolves on wounded prey. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark cursed under her breath. Her ships were in no shape for another fight, not after the losses they'd taken in the battle for the Zephyrian homeworld, but she had no choice. To flee now would be to abandon the system, and all the worlds beyond, to the Zephyrian onslaught. "Broadcast on all frequencies," she ordered. "This is Admiral Veronica Stark of the ISS Phoenix, requesting immediate assistance from any Allied forces in range. We are under attack by a massive Zephyrian fleet and require urgent support." For a long moment, there was nothing but the hiss of static. Then, one by one, the replies started coming in. "This is Captain Varro of the Corva frigate Stormwind. We are en route to your position. ETA 15 minutes. Jilin Cruiser Resolute answering your call. Our guns are yours, Admiral." And then a voice that made Stark's eyes widen in surprise. "Admiral Stark, this is Commander Zorux of the Elzanti battleship Ascendant. My fleet is at your disposal." On the screen, a new wave of contacts appeared at the edge of the sensor range. The angular, predatory shapes of Elzanti warships, dozens of them, falling into formation alongside the human and Rizian vessels. In the Phoenix's medbay, Isaac watched the hollow display with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The fleets were gathering, the greatest armada the galaxy had ever seen, united against a common foe. Beside him, Zara squeezed his hand, her eyes hard with determination despite her injuries. "So it begins," she murmured. "The final battle." Isaac nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. This was it. This was what all their sacrifices, all their struggles had led to. One last stand, one chance to turn back the tide of Zephyrian aggression and secure a future for all the free peoples of the galaxy. The stakes had never been higher, the odds had never been longer. But as he looked out at the assembling fleets, human and Rizian and Elzanti, all standing together against the darkness, Isaac felt a flicker of hope amid the dread. They would fight, they would bleed, and God's willing they would triumph. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark gritted her teeth as another volley of Quarian fire slammed into the ship's shields. The Alliance fleet had been holding their own against the Zephyrians, but the sudden arrival of the Quarian Confederation had tipped the scales. The Quarian ships were unlike anything Stark had ever seen. Sleek and angular, they darted through the battle with impossible speed and grace, their advanced weapons cutting through the Allied ship's defenses like a hot knife through butter. "Status report," Stark barked, gripping the arms of her command chair as the Phoenix shuddered under another impact. "Shields at 30%, Admiral," the tactical officer replied, his face grim. "We can't take much more of this." Stark cursed under her breath. The Quarians' technology was far beyond anything the Alliance possessed. They needed a new strategy, and fast. She turned to the ship's chief engineer, a grizzled Rizian named Corax. "Corax, I need options. Is there any way we can modify our weapons to be more effective against the Quarians?" Corax's brow furrowed in thought. It might be possible, Admiral. The Quarian ships seem to have a unique energy signature. If we can calibrate our weapons to target that signature specifically... Do it, Stark ordered. Take whatever resources you need. We're counting on you. As Korax and his team of human and Rizian engineers set to work, Stark turned her attention back to the battle raging outside. The Phoenix and the other Alliance ships were doing their best to hold the line, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. They needed a miracle. That miracle came in the form of Isaac and Zara. The two soldiers, still bearing the scars of their last mission, had volunteered to infiltrate the Quarian flagship and gather intelligence on their technology. It was a suicide mission, and they both knew it, but they also knew that it was the only way to turn the tide of the battle. As the Phoenix and the other Alliance ships engaged the Zephyrian-Quarian fleet in a series of desperate hit-and-run attacks, Isaac and Zara slipped aboard a Quarian transport ship and made their way to the flagship. The ship was a maze of sleek corridors and advanced technology, unlike anything they had ever seen, but they pushed forward, determined to complete their mission. Finally, they reached the ship's command center. The room was a hive of activity, with Quarian officers barking orders and technicians monitoring a dizzying array of holographic displays. Isaac and Zara exchanged a glance, then nodded. They knew what they had to do. Moving with lightning speed, they burst into the command center, weapons drawn. The Quarians were taken completely by surprise, and for a moment, the room was chaos. But Isaac and Zara were outnumbered and outmatched. They fought bravely, taking down several Quarian guards, but they were quickly surrounded. Just as they were about to be overwhelmed, Isaac's eyes fell on one of the holographic displays. It showed a schematic of the Quarian ship, with a pulsing red dot at its center. "Zara, look!" he shouted, pointing at the display. "That must be their power source, if we can destroy it." Zara nodded grimly. "It's our only chance." They fought their way out of the command center, leaving a trail of Quarian bodies in their wake. Alarms blared and lights flashed as they raced through the ship's corridors, heading for the power core. But the Quarians were hot on their heels. Plasma bolts sizzled past their heads as they ducked and weaved, desperately trying to stay ahead of their pursuers. Finally, they reached the power core. It was a massive chamber, thrumming with energy. In the center, a pulsing sphere of blue light hovered in mid-air, surrounded by a web of cables and conduits. Isaac and Zara didn't hesitate. They opened fire, pouring everything they had into the power core. The sphere flickered and dimmed, then exploded in a blinding flash of light. The ship shuddered and lurched as the power core went critical. Isaac and Zara sprinted for the hangar bay, dodging falling debris and sparking electrical panels. They barely made it to their stolen transport before the Quarian flagship tore itself apart, consumed by a massive explosion that lit up the void of space. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark watched in awe as the Quarian flagship vanished in a blinding flash of light. All around her, the Quarian ships faltered and went dark, their power sources suddenly cut off. The tide had turned. The Alliance fleet surged forward, picking off the helpless Quarian ships one by one. The Zephyrians, seeing their allies fall, broke and ran, fleeing back into the depths of space. But even as the Alliance celebrated their victory, Isaac and Zara knew that the battle was far from over. They had discovered the secret of the Quarians' power, a rare and unstable energy source, mined from a hidden location deep in Quarian space. If they could find that mine and destroy it, they could cripple the Quarians' ability to fight, but it would be a dangerous mission, deep in enemy territory. As the Phoenix and a strike team of Corva and Jilin ships set out to find the mine, Isaac and Zara exchanged a determined look. They had come this far, and they would see this through to the end. No matter the cost. As the Phoenix and the strike team closed in on the secret Quarian mining operation, a hail of energy blasts lit up the void of space. The mine's fortified perimeter bristled with anti-ship batteries, their destructive power fueled by the very substance the Quarians were extracting. Powerful energy shields shimmered around the mine, deflecting the initial salvos from the Allied ships. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark gritted her teeth as another volley slammed into the Dreadnought's shields. A frontal assault would be suicide. They needed another way in. "Split up the strike team," Stark ordered. "Have them approach the mine from multiple vectors. There must be a weak point in their defenses somewhere." As the strike team peeled off, Isaac and Zara gathered a squad of elite human and Rizian commandos. They had spotted a series of hidden tunnels snaking beneath the mine's surface, a potential backdoor into the heavily guarded facility. Donning their tactical gear, Isaac and Zara led their team into the twisting network of tunnels. The air grew thick with the stench of chemicals and ozone as they pushed deeper into the mine. Suddenly, they emerged into a vast cavern. Towering machines pulsed with eerie blue light, processing the raw energy ore into concentrated form. But the Quarians weren't just mining the substance. They were weaponizing it. "My God," Zara breathed. "They're planning to use this stuff against our ships." Isaac's face hardened with resolve. "Not if we have anything to say about it." As they crept through the cavernous chamber, a faint sound caught Isaac's ear. The clank of chains, the murmur of voices. Following the noise, they discovered a group of haggard prisoners, Elzanti, Corva, and Gillen, their faces gaunt and their bodies battered. "Please," one of the Elzanti whispered, "help us." Isaac and Zara exchanged a glance, then set to work breaking the prisoners' chains. They were going to need all the help they could get. Above, the battle raged on as the Phoenix and the rest of the strike team hammered at the Quarian defenses, drawing their fire away from Isaac and Zara's infiltration team. The Quarians' energy weapons sliced through hull plating like a scalpel, the acrid scent of melted metal filling the air. But the Phoenix and her allies gave as good as they got. Missiles and plasma bolts pounded against the mine's energy shields, searching for a chink in the armor. Inside the mine, Isaac and Zara planted explosive charges on the main reactor, the thrum of its power core reverberating through their bones. But as they turned to make their escape, a phalanx of Quarian guards blocked their path, led by a hulking figure in cybernetic battle armor, the Quarian Overseer. The Overseer let out a guttural roar, his voice a metallic rasp. "You dare to defy the Quarian Confederation. You will pay for your insolence with your lives." With a crackle of energy, the Overseer charged, his augmented body moving with terrifying speed and power. Isaac and Zara leapt to meet him, their weapons forgotten as they engaged the cyborg champion in brutal hand-to-hand combat. The Overseer was relentless, his mechanical limbs lashing out with piston-driven force. But Isaac and Zara were a team forged in the crucible of war, their movements perfectly in sync as they bobbed and wove around the Overseer's crushing blows. Isaac ducked beneath a sweeping strike and came up inside the Overseer's guard, slamming his fist into the cyborg's midsection. The blow landed with a crunch of breaking machinery, and the Overseer staggered back, sparks spitting from his damaged torso. Zara pressed the advantage, her kick catching the Overseer's knee joint with a sickening crack. The cyborg toppled, his cybernetic limbs splayed at awkward angles. "Now!" Isaac yelled, and Zara thumbed the detonator. The explosives ripped through the reactor core, setting off a cataclysmic chain reaction that tore the mine apart from the inside out. Chunks of rock and metal rained down as Isaac, Zara, and their team sprinted for the tunnels, the freed prisoners close on their heels. They burst from the mine just as it collapsed in on itself, a plume of dust and debris billowing into the sky. In space, the Quarian ships suddenly went dark, their energy weapons falling silent, as their power source was abruptly cut off. Seizing the moment, the Allied fleet surged forward, tearing into the helpless Quarian vessels with a vengeance. The Quarians and their Zephyrian allies broke and ran, fleeing before the resurgent might of the human-led coalition. Cheers erupted across the Allied comm channels as they watched their foes turn tail. But even as they savored their hard-won victory, Isaac and Zara knew that this was only the beginning. The Zephyrians and the Quarians had been bloodied, but not broken. They would be back, thirsting for revenge. The war was far from over. In the war-torn depths of the Zephyrian stronghold, The Allied leaders gathered, their faces haggard but determined. Admiral Stark stood at the head of the table, her eyes hard as flint. "We have a chance to end this war," she said, her voice ringing with conviction, "but it will take a weapon of unimaginable power." She gestured to a holographic display, which flickered to life, revealing a massive spherical device. "This is Prometheus," Stark explained, "a planet-killer bomb designed to burrow into a world's core and tear it apart from within." The room fell silent, the weight of the weapon's destructive potential hanging heavy in the air. "It's a last resort," the Rizian commander said, his scaled brow furrowed. "But perhaps our only hope." The others nodded grimly, their resolve hardening. The use of Prometheus was a terrible choice, but one they would make to save countless lives. As the fleets mobilized for the final assault, Isaac and Zara prepared for their own mission. They would infiltrate the Zephyrian homeworld, scouting the defenses for weaknesses that the Allied armada could exploit. The stolen Zephyrian shuttle shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere, its cloaking device struggling to maintain integrity. Isaac gripped the controls, his knuckles white. "Adjusting course," he muttered, guiding the craft towards a remote landing site. "Let's hope their patrols don't spot us." They set down in a rocky canyon, the shuttle's engines whining as they powered down. Isaac and Zara emerged into the harsh alien landscape, their weapons at the ready. For hours they scouted the terrain, marking the locations of anti-aircraft batteries, command bunkers, and troop concentrations. But as they crested a ridge, Zara froze, her eyes widening. "Isaac, look," she whispered, pointing to a sprawling structure nestled in the valley below. "That's no ordinary military installation." They crept closer, using their suits' enhanced vision to peer through the facility's walls. What they saw turned their stomachs. Rows upon rows of tanks, each one containing a twisted, mutated form suspended in bubbling liquid. Zephyrian scientists moved among the tanks, making notes on flickering datapads. "By the gods," Isaac breathed. "They're experimenting on prisoners, trying to create some kind of super soldier." Zara's face hardened. "We can't let this continue. We have to destroy this place." Moving with practiced efficiency, they planted explosive charges at key structural points throughout the facility. As they worked, they freed the few prisoners who still clung to life, their frail bodies racked by the Zephyrians' cruel experiments. But as they were setting the final charge, alarms began to blare. Zephyrian guards poured into the facility, their weapons spitting deadly energy bolts. Isaac and Zara fought like cornered beasts, their rifles bucking in their hands as they cut down the onrushing guards. The freed prisoners, armed with stolen weapons, rallied to their side, their eyes burning with the desire for vengeance. They fought their way back to the shuttle, the explosions from the charges ripping through the facility behind them. As they blasted free of the planet's atmosphere, the research installation collapsed in on itself, burying the Zephyrians' twisted experiments forever. Back on the Phoenix's bridge, Isaac and Zara made their grim report to Admiral Stark and the other Allied leaders. The news of the Zephyrian experiments steeled their resolve. This war had to end, no matter the cost. The fleets assembled, the might of a dozen worlds united against a common foe. At their head the Phoenix, armed with the terrible power of Prometheus. It would be a battle like no other, a desperate charge against a foe that had known nothing but cruelty and conquest. But with the fate of the galaxy at stake, there could be no turning back. The future would be forged in the fire of this final conflict, and every soul aboard the Allied ships was ready to pay the ultimate price for victory. As the Allied fleet emerged from hyperspace, the stunning sight of the Zephyrian homeworld filled the view screens, but hovering in orbit was something else entirely, a gargantuan space station, a bristling fortress of armor and weapons. Its scale defied belief. "By the gods," Admiral Stark whispered, the color draining from her face, "it's a trap." Scans revealed the awful truth. This was no mere battle station, but a superweapon of unimaginable power. The Zephyrians had harnessed the energy of their world's molten core and engineered a way to project it outwards in a devastating beam. "That thing could wipe out our entire fleet in one shot," Captain Garrett said grimly. Stark's mind raced, desperate for options. Retreat was unthinkable. They had to end this here and now. "All ships, engage the Zephyrian defenses. Concentrate fire on that station. The Phoenix will take point." The Allied fleet surged forward, a united armada of human, Rizian, Elzanti, Corva and Jilin ships. Zephyrian vessels swarmed to meet them, plasma cannons blazing. The void lit up with the firestorm of battle. Ships tumbled and burned on both sides. The Phoenix plunged into the heart of the fray, its experimental shields shrugging off the worst of the barrage. But then the station's weapon fired. A searing lance of pure energy ripped through the Allied lines, vaporizing ships instantly. The beam swept back and forth, leaving only drifting wreckage in its wake. On the Phoenix's bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Garrett clung to his command chair as the deck shuddered beneath him. "Shields are holding, but barely," the tactical officer shouted over the alarms. Stark gritted her teeth. "Keep pushing forward. We have to get in range to launch the Prometheus." Meanwhile, a small infiltration team raced through the bowels of the Zephyrian station. Isaac Green and Zara led the charge, a motley crew of human and allied commandos at their backs. They fought their way through cramped corridors choked with smoke and the stench of melted plastics. Zephyrian soldiers poured from every hatch and bulkhead, their weapons spitting deadly energy bolts. Drones buzzed overhead, strafing with rapid-fire blasters. "Push through!" Isaac roared, his rifle bucking as he cut down a charging Zephyrian. Beside him, Zara moved with fluid grace, her blade a whirlwind of death. At last they reached the station's control room. The doors hissed open, and there, waiting for them, stood Krath. The Zephyrian warlord was a nightmarish fusion of flesh and machine, his body bristling with cybernetic enhancements. "You're too late," he sneered, his voice a metallic rasp. "This station is the ultimate weapon. With it, the Zephyrian Empire will be unstoppable." "Not if we have anything to say about it," Isaac shot back. He and Zara charged, weapons raised, as the rest of their team engaged the Zephyrian officers surrounding Krath. The battle was brutal and close, a whirlwind of slashing blades and crackling energy beams in the tight confines of the control room. Krath was monstrously strong, his cybernetic limbs moving with blurring speed. Isaac ducked a sweeping blow that would have taken his head off, then came up firing. His shots ricocheted off Krath's armor, barely denting the warlord's defenses. Zara leapt, her blade finding a seam in Krath's cybernetics. The warlord roared in pain and fury, lashing out with a backhand that sent her flying. But the distraction was all Isaac needed. He charged, ramming his rifle butt into Krath's faceplate with a shattering crunch. The warlord staggered, his optics flickering. Isaac pressed his advantage, hammering blow after blow into Krath's body. Zara recovered and joined the assault, her blade flashing. Under their combined onslaught, Krath's defenses finally failed. His cybernetic limbs sparked and twitched, then went limp as Isaac put a plasma bolt through his skull. The Zephyrian warlord collapsed, nothing more than a twisted heap of meat and metal. Around them, the last of the Zephyrian officers fell to the commandos' weapons. "Quickly," Zara urged, already rushing to the control room's consoles. "We don't have much time." Together, they worked frantically to shut down the space station's defenses. The energy beam guttered and died, the titanic weapon falling silent. Shields flickered and failed, leaving the station bare to the Allied fleet's guns. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark saw her chance. "Fire the Prometheus," she barked. "Pour everything we have into that station." A sleek, deadly shape erupted from the Phoenix's launch bay. The Prometheus bomb, a weapon to shatter worlds. It streaked towards the Zephyrian station, a spear of righteous vengeance. The bomb struck the station's exposed core and detonated in a blinding flash. For a moment, a second sun blazed in the void. Then the station came apart, ripped to shreds by the unimaginable forces unleashed within it. Armor plates tumbled and spun, wreathed in gouts of flame. The once mighty weapon was reduced to an expanding cloud of debris. A ragged cheer went up across the Allied fleet's comm channels. On the Phoenix's bridge, Stark sagged back in her chair, her face lined with exhaustion and grim satisfaction. "It's over," she said softly. "We've won." But even as the Zephyrian ships fled, and the Allied fleet gathered in triumph above the shattered remains of the station, the cost of that victory was clear. The wreckage of gutted starships littered the void, mute testament to the lives spent in the battle. Worlds lay in ruins, countless innocents dead or displaced. The war was over, but the scars it left behind would linger for generations. The galaxy had been forever changed, baptized in the fire and blood of conflict. And those who had fought and bled and sacrificed to bring about this hard-won peace knew that their struggles were far from over, for there would always be new threats lurking in the darkness between the stars, waiting to plunge civilization back into the flames of war. The battle was won, but the war, the eternal war for the soul of the galaxy, would never end. The smoke of 1,000 burning worlds still choked the galaxy, as the Allied races began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. On the shattered husk of the Zephyrian homeworld, Elzanti and Corva engineers worked side by side to erect gleaming new cities from the rubble. Risian and Jilin medics tended to the wounded and displaced, setting aside centuries of mistrust in the face of shared suffering. In the grand halls of the Galactic Council, once a den of bickering and self-interest, a new spirit of unity and cooperation had taken hold. The fires of war had forged unbreakable bonds between the humans, Risians, Elzanti, Corva, and Jilin. Never again would they allow petty squabbles to divide them in the face of galactic threats. But even as the rebuilding efforts gained momentum, a new darkness was gathering at the edges of known space. The Galactic Council had received disturbing reports of a race of insectoid creatures known as the Swarm, quietly amassing their forces for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With the galaxy still reeling from the war with the Zephyrians, the Swarm saw an opportunity to expand its territory and subjugate new worlds. The Council, recognizing the need for swift action, turned to their most trusted agents, Isaac Green and Zara. The two soldiers, forged in the crucible of the Zephyrian War, accepted their new mission without hesitation. Together with a hand-picked team of Allied soldiers and scientists, they set out for the Hive, a region of space on the fringes of Swarm territory. As their ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Hive, Isaac and Zara were confronted with a sight that made their blood run cold. A swarm fleet, vaster than any they had ever seen, stretched out before them. The swarm ships were nightmarish organic constructs, pulsing with sickly bioluminescence. They looked less like spacecraft and more like living creatures, grown rather than built. "By the gods," Zara breathed, her eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like it." Isaac nodded grimly, his jaw set. "And those weapons? I'm picking up energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. Some kind of bioorganic plasma, if I had to guess." As they watched, the swarm ships began to disgorge their cargo. Millions upon millions of insectoid warriors, each one bristling with chitin armor and vicious, barbed appendages. The warriors descended on a nearby planet like a plague of locusts, swarming over its defenses with terrifying speed and coordination. The planet's inhabitants, a peaceful race of methane breathers, stood no chance. Within hours, their cities were reduced to smoldering ruins, their people slaughtered or dragged away to some horrific fate. Isaac and Zara exchanged a look of grim determination. They knew they could not stand idly by while the swarm ravaged another innocent world. "Get a message to the Council," Isaac barked to his comms officer. "Tell them we need reinforcements and fast. The swarm is on the move." But even as the distress call went out, Isaac knew that help would be slow to arrive. The Council races, still licking their wounds from the last war, would be hesitant to commit to another conflict so soon. It would fall to the humans, as it always had, to stand against the darkness. Admiral Stark, the hero of the Zephyrian War, began mobilizing her fleet the moment she received Isaac's message. The stage was set for a new struggle, a war against an enemy that knew neither pity nor mercy. And on the front lines, Isaac and Zara prepared to face the swarm head-on, knowing that the fate of the galaxy once again rested on their shoulders. As the battle raged on, the human fleet found itself battered and bloodied by the swarm's relentless onslaught. The bioorganic ships of the insectoid enemy seemed to shrug off even the most devastating volleys, their chitinous hulls knitting back together before the eyes of the horrified human crews. On the bridge of the Phoenix, Admiral Stark gritted her teeth as another barrage slammed into the Dreadnought's shields. "Damage report," she barked. "Shields at 30%, Admiral," the tactical officer replied, his face grim. "We can't take much more of this." Stark slammed her fist on the arm of her command chair. The swarm's regenerative abilities were unlike anything they had faced before. Conventional tactics were useless against an enemy that could heal itself faster than they could damage it. "All ships fall back and regroup at Rally Point Delta," Stark ordered, her voice heavy with frustration. "We need a new strategy." As the battered human fleet limped away from the battle, Isaac and Zara found themselves cut off from the main force. Their small scout ship, damaged in the fighting, drifted into the dense, fog-like atmosphere of the hive. "Damn it, I can't get the engines back online," Isaac growled, his hands flying over the sparking control panel. "We're going down." The ship plunged into the murky depths of the hive, its hull groaning under the strain. It crashed through towering spires of organic material, finally coming to rest at the base of a pulsing, fleshy structure. Isaac and Zara emerged from the wreckage, their weapons at the ready. The air was thick and cloying, filled with the stench of decay and the chittering of unseen creatures. "What is this place?" Zara muttered, her eyes scanning the eerie landscape. Isaac's gaze was drawn to the structure before them. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a twisted mass of flesh and chitin pulsing with an inner light. "I don't know," he said slowly, "but I think we need to find out." They approached the structure cautiously, their weapons trained on the shadows. As they drew closer, they saw that it was not just a single building, but a vast complex stretching out into the mists of the hive. They entered through a gaping, fleshy aperture, finding themselves in a labyrinth of pulsing corridors and cavernous chambers. Strange organic machines lined the walls, their purpose unclear. And then they saw it, a vast central chamber filled with row upon row of transparent pods. Inside each pod, suspended in a viscous liquid, was a creature from a different species: Rizian, Elzanti, Corva, Gillen, and even human. "By the gods," Zara breathed. "What are they doing to them?" Isaac approached one of the pods, his heart pounding. The creature inside, a Rizian, stared back at him with blank, lifeless eyes. Its scales were dull, and its body was wasted, as if it had been drained of all vitality. And then he saw the tubes, dozens of them snaking from the base of each pod and converging on a central point, a point that pulsed with a sickly green light. "That's a bioweapon," Isaac said, his voice hoarse with horror. "They're using these creatures to create some kind of mind control agent." Zara's eyes widened as she scanned the data on a nearby console. "This technology, it's Zephyrian. The swarm must have stolen it during the war." Isaac felt a chill run down his spine. If the swarm perfected this weapon, they would be unstoppable. They could enslave entire species, turning them into mindless drones to fight for the hive. "We have to destroy it," he said, his jaw set with determination. "We can't let the swarm have this power." They set to work, planting explosives at key structural points throughout the facility. But as they worked, the shadows around them began to stir. Swarm warriors, alerted to their presence, poured into the chamber from every direction. Isaac and Zara fought like cornered beasts, their weapons blazing as they cut down the insectoid hordes. Zara was a whirlwind of death, her blade slicing through chitin and flesh with equal ease. Isaac, his rifle spent, resorted to his fists, smashing swarm warriors with bone-crushing force. But for every warrior they felled, 10 more seemed to take its place, They were being overwhelmed, the tide of chitin and claws threatening to engulf them. And then, from the depths of the chamber, a monstrous form emerged. It was a swarm queen, a towering creature of nightmarish proportions. Its massive head was crowned with a glittering array of compound eyes, its maw dripping with venomous ichor. The queen let out a deafening shriek, and the swarm warriors redoubled their attack, driven into a frenzy by their monarch's presence. Isaac and Zara knew they were outmatched, but they also knew that they couldn't let the queen survive. If they did, the swarm would never stop, never rest until the galaxy was theirs. They charged the queen, dodging her slashing claws and stabbing proboscis. Isaac ducked under a sweeping blow and came up firing, his shots tearing into the queen's soft underbelly. Zara leapt onto the creature's back, her blade seeking out the chinks in its armored hide. The queen thrashed and bucked, trying to dislodge its attackers. But Isaac and Zara held on, their weapons finding their marks again and again. Finally, with a shuddering gasp, the queen collapsed, its massive form crashing to the chamber floor. Isaac and Zara stood over it, breathing hard, their armor dented and their skin slick with the creature's viscous blood. But even as they savored their victory, a hissing sound filled the air. The queen, in its final moments, had unleashed the bioweapon, a seething cloud of green mist that enveloped the chamber. Isaac, who had been standing closer to the queen, took the brunt of it. He staggered back, his eyes wide and unseeing, as the mist seeped into his skin. Zara rushed to his side, her heart in her throat. She could see the change coming over him, the sickly pallor spreading across his skin, the twitch of his muscles as the swarm's influence took hold. "Isaac, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Fight it!" But Isaac was already gone, his mind consumed by the swarm's insidious will. He turned to Zara, his eyes blank and pitiless, and raised his weapon. Zara knew what she had to do. With a sob of anguish, she raised her own rifle and fired, the shot taking Isaac square in the chest. He crumpled, his body hitting the ground with a dull thud. Around them, the facility shook as the explosives detonated, the bioweapon production system going up in flames. Zara, her heart shattered, could only watch as the fruits of the swarm's twisted experiments were reduced to ash. She gathered Isaac's body in her arms, tears streaming down her face. He had given his life to stop the swarm, to save countless billions from a fate worse than death. As she made her way out of the collapsing facility, Zara knew that Isaac's sacrifice would not be in vain. The swarm had been dealt a critical blow, their most insidious weapon destroyed before it could be unleashed upon the galaxy. But the war was far from over. The swarm, though weakened, was still a dire threat. It would fall to Zara and to the newly united races of the galaxy to finish what Isaac had started. She would take up his mantle, become the leader and hero that the Allied forces needed. She would fight on for Isaac, for the countless lives lost, and for the future of all free species. The war against the swarm had only just begun, and Zara would be at the forefront, a beacon of hope in the darkness. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, she would see this through to the end. As the Allied forces regrouped in the aftermath of the swarm's devastating attack, a shimmering portal suddenly burst into existence in the midst of their fleet. Zara, standing on the bridge of the Phoenix, stared in awe as a being of pure energy emerged from the portal, its form shifting and pulsing with an otherworldly light. "I am the emissary of the Vosh," the being spoke, its voice resonating through the minds of all present. "We have come to aid you in your fight against the swarm." Admiral Stark, her face etched with weariness and skepticism, stepped forward. "And why should we trust you? We know nothing of your kind or your intentions." The emissary's form shimmered, a wave of benevolent energy washing over the bridge. "We seek only to preserve life in all its forms. The swarm threatens not just your galaxy, but the very fabric of existence itself. We cannot stand idly by and watch as they consume all in their path." Zara, her curiosity piqued, approached the emissary. "What do you know of the swarm? How can we defeat them?" The emissary turned to face her, a flicker of recognition in its glowing eyes. The swarm is but a manifestation of a dark and ancient force, one that the Vosh have battled across countless dimensions and realities. It seeks to consume all life, to reduce the universe to a barren wasteland. But with our technology and your strength, we may yet prevail. And so an unlikely alliance was forged. The Vosh shared their advanced technology with the Allied forces, granting them weapons and defenses far beyond anything they had ever seen. Zara worked closely with the emissary, learning the ways of the Vosh and the secrets of their dimension-spanning battles. Under Zara's leadership and with the Vosh's aid, the Allies began to turn the tide against the swarm. They struck at the heart of the swarm's empire, their ships now equipped with Vosh technology that allowed them to penetrate the insectoid's defenses with ease. As they pushed deeper into swarm territory, they made a startling discovery. The swarm was not a single race but a collection of many different insectoid species, all enslaved and controlled by a single hive-like intelligence. The Overmind, the emissary revealed, its form pulsing with a mix of fear and determination, the source of the swarm's power and the embodiment of the dark force we have fought for so long. If we can sever its control, the swarm will fall. And so the Allies focused their efforts on targeting the Overmind, launching daring raids and surgical strikes against its strongholds. The battles were fierce and the losses heavy on both sides, but slowly, inexorably, they began to chip away at the swarm's power. In the midst of the fighting, Zara found herself drawn ever closer to the emissary, the energy being shared with her, the wonders and horrors of the multiverse, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that played out across infinite realities. "You are more than just a soldier, Zara," the emissary whispered to her in a quiet moment between battles. "You are a beacon of hope, a champion of life. In you, I see the potential for a brighter future, one free from the shadow of the swarm." Zara felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders, a burden and a promise all at once. She knew that the fate of not just her own galaxy, but of all existence rested on the outcome of this war. And so she fought on, leading the Allies in a desperate charge against the swarm's last strongholds. The battles were bitter and bloody, the swarm fighting with the ferocity of a cornered beast. But the Allies would not be denied, would not rest until the threat was ended once and for all. Planet by planet, system by system, they pushed the swarm back, liberating worlds that had long suffered under the insectoid's cruel reign. And all the while, the emissary stood at Zara's side, a constant presence and a source of strength in the darkest of times. The war dragged on, a battle of attrition that tested the resolve of even the most hardened veterans, but Zara and her allies held firm, driven by a determination that transcended mere survival. They were fighting for the future, for the right of all life to exist free from the swarm's shadow. And so even as the losses mounted, and the enemy's numbers seemed endless, they pressed on, for in the end there could be no surrender, no compromise. The swarm would be defeated, or all would be lost. In the heart of the Allied command center, Zara and the emissary pored over the latest intelligence reports, their faces grim. The war against the swarm had reached a critical juncture, and despite their best efforts, the insectoid menace continued to push forward, consuming world after world. "There must be something we're missing," Zara muttered, her eyes scanning the holographic display. "The swarm's tactics are too coordinated, too precise. It's almost as if they're being guided by some higher intelligence." The emissary nodded, its energy form pulsing with a thoughtful hue. "I have long suspected that the swarm is not acting alone," it said, "and now I believe I have discovered the truth." The emissary waved its hand, and the holographic display shifted, revealing a pulsating mass of psionic energy. "This," the emissary explained, "is the Overmind, a being of pure psionic power that exists outside of normal space and time. It is the source of the swarm's strength, the one that directs their every move." Zara's eyes widened as she took in the implications. "So if we can somehow sever the Overmind's control, we can end this war once and for all," the emissary finished. But the emissary's next words were grim. To do that, we will need to journey to the very heart of the swarm's domain, a place known as the Nexus. The emissary explained that the Nexus was a conduit between dimensions, a place where the Overmind's power was at its strongest. It was heavily guarded by the swarm's most elite warriors and was considered impenetrable by conventional means. Zara's jaw tightened. Then we'll find another way. Together, Zara and the emissary formulated a plan. Using the Vosh's advanced technology, they would open a portal directly into the Nexus, bypassing the swarm's defenses and striking at the Overmind directly. It was a risky gambit and the chances of success were slim, but it was the only way. As the Allied forces prepared for the final battle, Zara and the emissary gathered a strike team of their most skilled warriors. Humans, Rizians, Elzanti, Corva, and Gillen, all united in their determination to end the swarm's reign of terror. With a burst of energy, the Vosh portal flared to life and the strike team charged through, weapons at the ready. They emerged into a nightmare realm, a twisted landscape of pulsing organic matter and writhing tendrils. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath their feet squelched with each step. And then the swarm was upon them. Hordes of insectoid warriors poured out from every crevice and tunnel, their chitinous exoskeletons glistening in the sickly light. They were monstrous things, all claws and mandibles and razor-sharp talons. The strike team met them head-on, their weapons blazing. Plasma bolts and searing beams of energy lit up the gloom as they fought their way deeper into the Nexus. Each swarm warrior was more powerful and terrifying than the last, their strength and speed enhanced by the Overmind's psionic might, but the strike team would not be deterred. At last, they reached the center of the Nexus, a vast chamber that pulsed with malevolent energy. And there, waiting for them, was the Overmind itself. It was a horrific thing, a seething mass of psionic power that seemed to fill the entire chamber. It had no physical form, no single point that could be attacked or destroyed. Insignificant specks, the Overmind's voice boomed, echoing through their minds. Your struggle is futile, your lives are meaningless. You are but dust in the wind, to be scattered and forgotten. But Zara and the emissary stood firm, their resolve unshaken. They knew that they were fighting for something greater than themselves, for the future of all life in the galaxy. With a cry of defiance, they launched their assault, pouring all of their strength and willpower into the attack. The Vosh technology amplified their powers, allowing them to strike at the Overmind in ways that should have been impossible. The battle was intense and brutal, a maelstrom of psionic energy and searing light. The Overmind lashed out with devastating blasts of power, each one capable of rending flesh and shattering bone. But Zara and the emissary pushed forward, their own psionic abilities enhanced by the Vosh's technology. They struck at the Overmind's core, chipping away at its defenses with each blow. It was a battle that seemed to rage for an eternity, a clash of wills and energies on a scale beyond comprehension. The strike team fought with everything they had, their bodies and minds pushed to the very limit of endurance. And then, in a final desperate act, the emissary unleashed the full might of the Vosh's power. It tore open a rift in the very fabric of reality, a swirling vortex of pure, unbridled energy. The Overmind screamed as it was drawn into the rift, its psionic essence unraveling and dissipating into the void. Its cries echoed through the Nexus, a sound of utter defeat and despair. And with that it was over. The Overmind was gone, and with it the swarm's driving force. Across the galaxy, the insectoid hordes began to falter and fall, their hive mind shattered beyond repair. In the Nexus, the strike team watched in stunned silence as the chamber began to collapse around them, the Overmind's psionic energy dissipating into nothingness. They barely managed to escape through the portal before the entire structure imploded, consumed by the rift's ravenous energies. The war was over. The galaxy was saved. But the cost had been immense, the sacrifices made too numerous to count. As the Allied forces regrouped and began the slow process of rebuilding, They knew that the scars of this conflict would linger for generations to come. But for now there was a moment of triumph, of relief and joy and bittersweet remembrance. They had stood against the darkness and emerged victorious, their unity and determination a shining beacon in the face of annihilation. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. They would face it together as allies and friends bound by the unbreakable ties of shared struggle and sacrifice. In the wake of the swarm's defeat, the galaxy teetered on the brink of a new era of conflict. Zara, the hero who had led the Allied forces to victory, found herself thrust into the role of diplomat and peacemaker. She shuttled from world to world, her ship cutting through the void like a needle stitching together the fraying fabric of the Alliance. On the Zephyrian homeworld, she faced a sea of angry faces, their scales rippling with barely contained resentment. "You humans brought this war upon us," the Zephyrian Chancellor hissed, his claws digging into the arm of his throne. "Your reckless expansion, your insatiable hunger for power. It was only a matter of time before you dragged us all into your mess." Zara met his glare with a steady gaze. "The swarm was a threat to us all," she said evenly. "We fought together, bled together to beat them back. Surely that counts for something." But even as she spoke the words, she could feel the unease prickling at the back of her neck. The Zephyrians were not the only ones nursing old grudges. The Corva and the Gillen, once staunch allies, now circled each other like wary predators, each vying for a larger slice of the post-war pie. It was during a particularly tense negotiation session that the message arrived. Zara's comms unit chimed, the sound cutting through the raised voices and heated arguments like a knife. She glanced down at the screen, her brow furrowing at the string of unfamiliar coordinates that scrolled across it. "The true threat is yet to come," the message read, the words seeming to pulse with an ominous energy. Zara felt a chill run down her spine. She had learned to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming at her that this was no ordinary message. She gathered a small team of her most trusted companions, a grizzled human mercenary, a quick-witted Elzanti hacker, a soft-spoken Rizian medic. Together, they boarded a sleek, fast ship and set out into the uncharted depths of space. As they drew closer to the coordinates, Zara felt a growing sense of unease. The stars here were strange, their light sickly and dim. Derelict ships drifted past, their hulls pitted and scarred, like the bones of some long-dead leviathan. They docked at a lonely space station, its corridors echoing with an eerie silence. As they explored deeper into the facility, they began to find signs of a dark presence. Scorch marks marred the walls, the metal twisted and melted by some unknown energy weapon. Strange symbols were carved into the bulkheads, their angles harsh and jagged, as if scratched by some inhuman hand. In a cavernous chamber at the heart of the station, they found a terminal, its screen flickering with a cascade of alien glyphs. The Elzanti hacker stepped forward, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to decipher the code. This is impossible," she breathed, her eyes widening in disbelief. "These records predate anything we've ever seen. They talk about a race called the Zenthari, a species so ancient that they were already old when the Vosh first achieved sentience." Zara leaned in, her gaze scanning the scrolling text. What do they want? Why have they been hiding in the shadows all this time? Before the hacker could respond, a searing bolt of energy slammed into the terminal, reducing it to a smoking ruin. Zara spun, her weapon leaping into her hand as a group of figures emerged from the shadows. They were tall and gaunt, their skin a sickly shade of grey. Their eyes glowed with a cold, malevolent light, and they carried strange, angular weapons that hummed with an eerie resonance. "You should not have come here," one of them rasped, its voice like the crackling of dry leaves. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into." Zara and her team reacted instantly, diving for cover as the Zenthari opened fire. The chamber erupted into a chaos of flashing energy beams and exploding consoles. Zara rolled and came up firing, her shots tearing through the grey flesh of one of the attackers. But the Zenthari were unnaturally fast and strong, their movements a blur of speed and precision. One of them lunged at Zara, its weapon blazing with a sickly green light. She barely managed to dodge the blow, feeling the searing heat of the beam as it passed inches from her face. Just as it seemed that they would be overwhelmed, a blinding flash of light filled the chamber. Zara blinked, her eyes watering, to see a familiar figure standing before her. It was the emissary of the Vosh, its form shimmering with an ethereal energy. "Zara," the emissary spoke, its voice echoing in her mind. "You have uncovered a truth that has been hidden for eons. The Zenthari are a plague, a force of pure destruction that seeks to unravel the very fabric of reality." The emissary waved its hand, and the Zenthari attackers were thrown back, their weapons clattering to the floor. They have been manipulating the races of the galaxy for centuries, stoking the fires of war and conflict in order to weaken you, and now, with the galaxy in chaos, they are ready to strike. Zara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach as the magnitude of the threat became clear. The swarm, the Zephyrians, even the Vosh themselves, they were all just pawns in a game that had been played since the dawn of time. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must unite the races of the galaxy once more," the emissary said. "Only together can you hope to stand against the coming darkness." With a final flash of light, the emissary vanished, leaving Zara and her battered team alone in the ruined chamber. They looked at each other, their faces grim with the weight of the knowledge they now carried. They had faced many challenges, many foes, but this was something else entirely, a threat that dwarfed anything they had ever encountered before. But Zara knew that they could not falter now. The fate of the galaxy, of everything they held dear, hung in the balance. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders as she turned to face her team. "Let's go," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound determination. "We have work to do." Zara gritted her teeth as she watched Talon's ship streak towards the Zenthari outpost, a small dark shape against the starry expanse. The distraction had to be perfect, every detail flawless, or the Zenthari would see through the ruse. Talon's comm crackled to life. "Approaching target. Shields up, weapons hot, ready to give these bastards a black eye." Zara nodded even though he couldn't see her. "Do what you have to, Talon, but be careful. We need you back in one piece." The line went silent as Talon focused on his approach. The outpost loomed ahead, a jagged metal fortress bristling with gun turrets and sensor arrays. Talon jinked and wove, dodging the first probing shots from the outpost's defenses. "I'm through the perimeter," he reported, his voice tight with concentration, moving to target the power core. On Zara's tactical display, a series of green lights winked on as Talon's team activated their suit beacons, signaling that they had infiltrated the station. For a few tense minutes, all was quiet. Then the comm exploded with the sound of pulse fire and shouting voices. "We're blown," Talon yelled, his words punctuated by the hiss of energy weapons. "Zenthari security forces closing in." Zara's grip tightened on the edge of her console. "Get out of there, Talon, now!" "Charges are set," Talon replied, his breathing ragged. 60 seconds to detonation. We're heading for the extraction point." The minutes crawled by, each second an eternity. Zara watched Talon's beacon weaving through the station's corridors, a pack of red dots, Zenthari warriors, in hot pursuit. 50 seconds, 40. A burst of static. "They're right on top of us," Talon shouted. More pulse fire, a scream of pain. 30 seconds. "The hangar's just ahead," Talon panted. "We're almost—" His words cut off in a hail of weapons fire. Zara's heart seized in her chest. 20 seconds. Then a roar of engines, and Talon's ship burst from the side of the outpost, fire blossoming from a dozen hull breaches. The red dots converged on the hangar, pulse fire stitching the void. 10 seconds. The outpost vanished in a blinding flash as the charges detonated, the explosion rippling out in a silent shockwave. Talon's ship rode the crest of the blast, tumbling end over end, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. Talon, Zara shouted. Talon, report. A crackle of static, then, "We're okay," Talon's voice strained but alive. "A little cooked, but we'll make it." Zara slumped back in her seat, relief washing over her. The gambit had worked. Now they just had to survive what came next. The Allied fleet waited, engines thrumming, weapons primed. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a blade, every eye glued to the sensor displays. "Hyperspace ruptures detected," the sensor officer reported, his voice tight. "Multiple signatures, it's the Zenthari." Zara's hands balled into fists at her sides. This was it, the moment of truth. The Zenthari ships sliced back into real space, their angular black hulls seeming to swallow the light around them. They moved with a predatory grace, sliding into attack formation with fluid ease. And then all hell broke loose. The Zenthari opened fire, lances of searing energy slashing out at the Allied ships. Shields flared and popped, armor boiled and ran like wax. The Allies returned fire, missiles and energy beams crisscrossing the void in a deadly web. Zara's ship shuddered as a Zenthari beam clipped their dorsal shields, alarms blaring in protest. She ignored them, her focus locked on the tactical display. "Keep us in the thick of it," she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to buy Dr. Voss time." Her crew obeyed without hesitation, throwing the ship into a dizzying series of evasive maneuvers. They danced and spun, lashing out with every weapon at their disposal, each hit a small victory in a battle they couldn't hope to win alone. In the heart of the Allied formation, the Singularity engine thrummed with building power, waves of distortion rippling out from its massive frame. Dr. Voss worked frantically at her console, her fingers flying over the controls. "Power levels at 60%, she reported, her voice tight with strain. 80, 90. A cheer went up from the bridge crew, but it was short-lived. A massive shape, a Zenthari Dreadnought, burst through the Allied lines, its weapons hammering at the engine's shields. "Divert all power to forward shields," Zara barked. "Get us between that Dreadnought and the engine." Her ship surged forward, placing itself squarely in the path of the Dreadnought's fire. The hits came hard and fast, each one sending shudders through the hull. "Shields failing," the tactical officer reported, his voice edged with desperation. "Hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 12. Zara gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. They just needed a little more time. The Dreadnought loomed ahead, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. It fired a searing lance of destruction that cut through the ship's hull like tissue paper. Consoles exploded, sending showers of sparks cascading across the bridge. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. The acrid stench of burnt circuitry filled the air. But still they fought. With every last ounce of strength and defiance, they stood against the tide of darkness, refusing to yield. The fate of the galaxy hung by a thread, and that thread was held in their battered, bleeding hands. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted in the void of space. Zara squinted, her heart pounding, as a massive alien ship emerged from hyperspace. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, sleek and black, with strange markings etched into its hull. The ship opened fire on the Zenthari Dreadnought, green lances of energy slicing through its shields like they weren't even there. The Dreadnought lurched, its commander caught off guard by this unexpected assault. It began to turn, bringing its own weapons to bear on this new threat. "Now's our chance," Zara shouted over the chaos. "To the engine!" She and her team sprinted across the station, pulse rifles spitting fire at the Zenthari warriors who had boarded the facility. The aliens were tall and gaunt, their skin a sickly grey. They fought with a cold, methodical fury, but Zara and her soldiers were fueled by desperation and raw courage. They reached the Singularity engine, a towering spire of gleaming metal and pulsing energy. Dr. Voss was there, her hands flying over the control panel. "I need more time," she cried, her voice strained. Zara and her team formed a perimeter, engaging the Zenthari in brutal close-quarters combat. Fists and rifle butts smashed against alien armor, blood, both red and black, spattering the deck. Zara risked a glance out the viewport. The mysterious ship was locked in a duel with the Dreadnought, the two vessels exchanging blistering salvos. But then, to her horror, the black ship broke off, turning towards the station. "What are they doing?" she whispered, fear clutching at her heart. But the ship didn't fire. Instead, a pulsing energy field began to emanate from it, enveloping the Singularity engine. The field grew brighter and brighter, until it was blinding. "I've got it!" Dr. Voss shouted triumphantly. She slammed her hand down on the activation button, and the engine roared to life. Space itself seemed to warp and twist around it, the very fabric of reality straining at the seams. And then, at the heart of the engine, a black hole began to form. It was small at first, but it grew with terrifying speed, its gravitational pull becoming irresistible. The Zenthari ships, still locked in battle with the Allied fleet, began to shudder and break apart. One by one, they were drawn into the ravenous maw of the Singularity, their hulls crumpling like tin foil. The Dreadnought fought against the inexorable pull, its engines flaring, but it was a losing battle. With a final agonized groan, the mighty ship was torn to pieces, vanishing into the heart of the black hole. Zara watched, awestruck and terrified, as the Zenthari fleet was consumed. The black hole, its hunger sated, began to shrink, collapsing in on itself until it winked out of existence. The energy field around the engine dissipated, and the mysterious black ship powered down its weapons. An eerie silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the hiss of leaking atmosphere and the crackle of broken circuitry. Zara and her team, battered and bloodied but alive, stared at the ship that had saved them. A hatch opened on its side and a figure emerged, tall and slender, with translucent skin and glowing green eyes. "I am of the Vardari," the being said, its voice melodic and alien. "We have watched your struggle against the Zenthari. We knew the Singularity engine was your only hope, and so we came to ensure its success." Zara could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You saved us," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "Without you, we would have been lost." The Vardari inclined its head. "Your courage and sacrifice bought us the time we needed. The Zenthari are defeated, but the war is not over. There will be other threats, other battles. But for now, rest and heal. You have earned it." Zara nodded, exhaustion washing over her like a wave. The battle was won, the galaxy was safe. But she knew the Vardari was right. This was only the beginning. The Allies would need to remain vigilant, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. But for now, in this moment of hard-won peace, she allowed herself a small smile of triumph. Against all odds, they had prevailed. The galaxy was free, and that was a victory worth savoring. The galaxy erupted in celebration as news of the Zenthari's defeat spread like wildfire. On every Allied world, from the gleaming spires of the Elzanti homeworld to the war-torn ruins of the Rizian frontier, people took to the streets in joyous revelry. Zara and her team, the heroes who had struck the decisive blow against the ancient foe, were hailed as saviors and legends. The Galactic Council, eager to honor their champions, invited Zara and her comrades to a grand celebration on the Council's homeworld. The team, exhausted but proud, boarded a sleek diplomatic vessel and set out for the heart of galactic civilization. But as they cruised through the star-strewn void, their ship was suddenly intercepted by a trio of strange angular craft. The unknown vessels hailed them, and a holographic figure materialized on the bridge, a tall, ethereal being with luminous eyes and skin that shimmered like starlight. "Greetings, heroes of the galaxy," the figure spoke, its voice resonating with ancient power. "I am Varen, emissary of the Vardari. We have urgent matters to discuss." Zara stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "The Vardari, we've never heard of your people before." Varen inclined his head. "We have watched from the shadows for eons, guardians against a threat more ancient and terrible than you can imagine. The Zenthari were mere pawns in a greater game, a game orchestrated by the Nexus." The team exchanged uneasy glances as Varen continued. The Nexus are beings of immense power, as old as the universe itself. They seek to remake reality in their image, and they have manipulated the younger races for millennia to achieve their goals. "Why come to us now?" Zara asked, her tone wary. "The Vardari have opposed the Nexus since time immemorial," Varin said. "But we are few and they are many. We need your strength, heroes. Without your aid, the galaxy will surely fall." Zara looked to her team, saw the determination in their eyes. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to turn away now. She turned back to Varin and nodded. "We're with you. What's our next move?" But before the Vardari could reply, a klaxon blared through the ship. The comms officer, her face pale, turned to Zara. "Commander, urgent message from the Galactic Council. Their homeworld is under attack." Varin's image flickered, his features grim. It has begun. The Nexus has made their move. Zara's jaw clenched. "Set a course for the Council homeworld, maximum speed, and broadcast a call to arms on all frequencies. We need every ship we can muster." The ship leaped into hyperspace, stars blurring into streaks of light. They emerged into a scene of utter chaos. The Council homeworld, a once pristine jewel of a planet, was shrouded in smoke and flame. Massive, angular ships, black as the void, hung in orbit, raining destruction on the cities below. Zara stared at the carnage, her heart racing. The Nexus ships were unlike anything she had seen before, their hulls seeming to drink in the light around them. And there were so many, an endless armada of world-enders. But she had no time to despair. The Vardari ships, sleek and silver, were already engaging the enemy, their weapons leaving scars of molten metal on the Nexus hulls, and behind them, a ragtag fleet of allied vessels was dropping out of hyperspace. Rizian cruisers, Elzanti dreadnoughts, Corva frigates, all united against this new threat. "All ships engage the enemy," Zara barked into the comms. "We have to buy time for evacuation." The battle was joined, the void alight with the fire of 1,000 suns. The Allied ships fought with desperate courage, but the Nexus vessels were nightmarishly powerful. For every enemy ship destroyed, 3 more took its place. As the battle raged above, Zara received a desperate plea from the planet's surface. A strike team of Nexus warriors had landed near the Galactic Council chambers and were cutting a swath of destruction towards the heart of galactic government. If they took the Council, the galaxy would be thrown into disarray. Zara turned to Talon, her eyes hard. "Take your team and stop those warriors. We'll hold the line up here." Talon nodded, his face grim, and sprinted for the drop pods. Moments later, he and his squad were hurtling towards the planet's surface, ready to meet the enemy head-on. They hit the ground hard, the pod doors blasting open to reveal a hellscape of rubble and fire. The Nexus warriors were already on the move, their black armor drinking in the light, their weapons spitting bolts of searing energy. Talon and his team charged forward, their own weapons blazing. The battle was brutal and close, the soldiers fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground. The Nexus warriors were incredibly strong, their armor shrugging off blasts that would have felled a lesser foe. But Talon and his comrades were relentless, driven by a fierce determination to protect the Council at any cost. They pushed forward, step by blood-soaked step, leaving a trail of shattered Nexus bodies in their wake. Finally, they reached the steps of the Council chambers, but barring their way was a towering figure in midnight armor, a crackling sword of pure darkness in its hand. The Nexus commander, a being of awful power. Talon stepped forward, his rifle leveled at the creature's head. "That's far enough, monster." The Nexus commander laughed, a sound like the tolling of a funeral bell. "Foolish mortal, you cannot stand against the might of the Nexus." And then it was upon him, the dark sword flashing. Talon met the blow with his own blade, a shard of pure energy honed to a molecular edge. The impact sent shockwaves through the ruined city, shattering windows and cracking stone. They dueled across the rubble, 2 titans locked in mortal combat. The Nexus commander was incredibly fast, its blade weaving a web of dark energy. But Talon was a veteran of 100 battles, his own sword flashing in a blur of light. In the end, it was Talon's indomitable will that proved the difference. With a final desperate lunge, he drove his blade through the commander's chest plate, piercing the dark heart within. The Nexus commander staggered back, black ichor seeping from the wound. It fell to its knees, the dark sword clattering to the ground. "Impossible," it rasped. "The Nexus cannot be defeated." Talon stood over the fallen creature, his armor dented and scorched, his face streaked with blood and sweat. "You just were," he growled. But even as the words left his mouth, Talon staggered, his hand going to his side. His armor was slick with blood, a deep gash running from hip to shoulder. He had taken a mortal blow in the final exchange. Talon's squad rushed to his side, but he waved them away. "I'm done," he coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Get to the council, protect them." As his vision dimmed and his strength faded, Talon looked to the sky, to the titanic battle raging above. He had bought Zara the time she needed. The rest was up to her. The battle above the Quarian homeworld raged with a savage intensity, the void of space lit by the flashes of countless energy weapons. On the bridge of her flagship, Zara gritted her teeth as another volley of Nexus fire hammered the ship's shields. The distress call from the Quarians, their former enemies, had been unexpected, but Zara knew she couldn't stand by while an entire race was slaughtered, even if they had once been on opposite sides of a war. "Helm, bring us about," Zara barked, her eyes locked on the tactical display. "We're going in." The Allied fleet split, a portion breaking off to engage the Nexus forces, while the rest descended towards the planet's surface. As they punched through the atmosphere, Zara's heart sank at the devastation that greeted them. The Quarian cities were in ruins, once proud towers reduced to shattered husks, the streets choked with rubble and the bodies of the fallen. The Nexus's ground forces swarmed like a plague of locusts, their black armor glinting in the harsh light of the Quarian sun. Zara led her troops into the fray, her rifle spitting plasma bolts as they fought their way through the shattered streets. The Nexus warriors were relentless, fighting with a savagery that bordered on madness. They seemed to revel in the slaughter, their eyes glowing with a sickly, malevolent light. Inch by bloody inch, Zara and her allies clawed their way toward the heart of the Nexus stronghold. The resistance grew fiercer with every step, the enemy throwing themselves at the Allied lines with reckless abandon. But Zara's troops would not be denied. They fought with the desperate courage of those who knew that the fate of a world hung in the balance. As they breached the final defenses and stormed the central compound, Zara found herself face to face with a figure out of a nightmare. The Overlord towered over the battlefield, a being of pure darkness and malice. Its form was cloaked in shadow, but its eyes burned with a hatred that seemed to pierce the soul. "Foolish mortals," the Overlord rasped, its voice like the scrape of a tomb door. "You dare to stand against the might of the Nexus?" Zara raised her blade, the metal gleaming in the murky light. "We dare," she said, her voice ringing with defiance, "and we will not stop until your kind is nothing but a bad memory." The Overlord's laughter was like the cracking of ice. It raised its staff, the twisted metal pulsing with a sickly, eerie light. Zara met its charge head-on, her blade clashing against the staff in a shower of sparks and dark energy. The battle was joined, the two leaders locked in a deadly duel amidst the chaos of the war. The Overlord was strong, stronger than any foe Zara had faced before. Each blow from its staff was like the impact of a meteor, sending shockwaves rippling through her body. But Zara would not yield. She fought back with all the skill and fury of a born warrior, her blade flashing in a deadly dance. The battle raged for what seemed like an eternity, neither side able to gain the upper hand. Zara's muscles burned with fatigue, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The Overlord's attacks were relentless, a storm of dark energy that threatened to overwhelm her defenses. But then, for just a fraction of a second, the Overlord's guard slipped. Zara saw her chance and lunged forward, her blade piercing the creature's chest and plunging into its black heart. The Overlord let out a roar of agony, its body convulsing as it collapsed to the ground. With their leader fallen, The Nexus forces on the Quarian homeworld fell into disarray. Zara and her allies pressed the attack, driving the enemy back until the last of their ships fled into the void. The planet was liberated, its people saved from a fate worse than death. But even as the Quarians cheered their saviors and pledged their allegiance to the Allied cause, Zara knew that this was only the beginning. The Nexus's power stretched across the stars, and this victory, however hard won, was only a small step in a much larger war. And then the news came, a desperate transmission from the Allied homeworlds. The Nexus had launched a massive offensive, their fleets blotting out the stars as they descended upon the heart of the Alliance. Zara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. The final battle was upon them, a struggle that would decide the fate of the galaxy itself. She looked out at her battered, bloody troops, saw the fire of determination burning in their eyes. They would fight, and they would win, or they would die trying. For the sake of all the worlds, all the lives that hung in the balance, they had to. Zara raised her blade, its metal stained with the blood of the enemy. "To the homeworlds," she cried, her voice ringing across the battlefield. "To victory or to a warrior's death." And with that, they plunged into the fray once more, ready to meet their destiny head-on. Datil. As Zara's ship descended through the thin atmosphere of the barren planet, she felt a growing sense of unease. The Nexus's offer of a meeting reeked of a trap, but what choice did they have? The war had raged for too long, with too many lives lost on both sides. Beside her, Talon stood tall and proud, his wounds from the battle for the Galactic Council's homeworld now healed. His eyes were hard as he scanned the desolate landscape below, searching for any sign of an ambush. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, kicking up a cloud of red dust. As the ramp lowered, they were met by a contingent of Nexus warriors, their black armor glinting in the harsh sunlight. "Follow us," one of them growled, his voice distorted by his helmet's vocoder. "The Prime is waiting." Zara and her team exchanged wary glances, but followed the warriors across the rocky terrain. They approached a massive structure that seemed to grow out of the very bedrock, its dark metal walls pulsing with an eerie energy. Inside, they were led through a maze of corridors, each one more oppressive than the last. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadows, and there, seated upon a throne of jagged obsidian, was the Prime. He was a being of immense size, his form cloaked in robes of deepest black. His eyes glowed with a sickly, otherworldly light, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to resonate through their very bones. "Welcome, Zara of the Allied races," the Prime rumbled, his tone a mix of contempt and grudging respect. "I have summoned you here to offer you a choice. Join us and become part of something greater than you could ever imagine, or perish, along with all those you hold dear." Zara stepped forward, her chin held high. "We will never submit to your rule," she declared, her voice ringing through the chamber. "The Allied races will fight to the last breath to defend our freedom." The Prime chuckled, the sound like the grating of stone on stone. "You have no choice," he said. "The Nexus has been planning this war for centuries, shaping events from the shadows. Your resistance is futile. Our power is absolute." But Zara would not be cowed. She drew strength from the presence of her allies, from the knowledge that they stood united against this threat. "We will never surrender," she said, her eyes blazing with defiance. "We will fight and we will win." The Prime's eyes narrowed and he made a small gesture with one clawed hand. Instantly, the Nexus warriors sprang into action, their weapons humming to life. Zara and her team met them head-on, their own weapons flashing. They fought with the skill and fury of those who knew that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. But the Nexus warriors were relentless, their strength and speed enhanced by dark technologies. Talon, still not fully recovered from his previous injuries, was overwhelmed, his weapon knocked from his grasp. "Talon!" Zara cried, but it was too late. The Nexus warriors dragged him away, his struggles futile against their iron grip. Outnumbered and outmatched, Zara had no choice but to order a retreat. They fought their way back to the ship, leaving a trail of Nexus bodies in their wake. But the cost had been high. Talon was gone, a prisoner of the enemy. As they blasted away from the planet, Zara slumped in her chair, despair washing over her. The Nexus's power was vast, their reach seemingly infinite. How could they hope to defeat such a foe? But then a transmission came through on the emergency channel. The Krix, the insectoid race that had proven such a valuable ally, were under attack. The Nexus had launched a massive offensive against their homeworld, and their defenses were crumbling. Zara sat up straight, a new resolve hardening in her eyes. They could not let the Krix fall. They had to act, and act now. "Set course for the Krix homeworld," she ordered, her voice like steel. "We're going to show the Nexus what happens when they dare to threaten our allies." The ship leaped into hyperspace, racing towards the besieged planet. And as they approached, the scale of the devastation became clear. The Nexus's ships swarmed like locusts, their weapons leaving trails of fire across the surface. The Krix's once mighty defenses lay in ruins, shattered by the onslaught. But Zara and her allies did not hesitate. They plunged into the fray, their own ships spitting fire as they engaged the Nexus fleet. The battle was brutal, both sides taking heavy losses as they clashed amidst the wreckage of Krix ships and stations. Yet in the end, through sheer grit and determination, the Allies prevailed. The Nexus fleet, battered and broken, fled back into the void, leaving the Krix homeworld in the hands of its defenders once more. 30. The Allied fleet burst from hyperspace, weapons primed and shields raised, ready to face the final battle against the Nexus. But as the swirling vortex of faster-than-light travel faded and the starfield solidified around them, the crews of the Allied ships felt their blood run cold. Before them loomed a structure unlike anything they had ever seen, a massive pulsating fortress that seemed to be alive, its surface writhing and shifting like the skin of some titanic, malevolent beast. And surrounding this abomination was a fleet of ships that defied all known laws of engineering and biology, vast organic vessels that seemed to have been grown rather than built, their hulls pulsing with an eerie, sickly light that turned the stomachs of all who beheld them. "By the gods!" breathed Talon, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and revulsion. "What manner of hellish nightmare have we stumbled into?" Zara, standing at the helm of the flagship, her face set in grim determination, shook her head. "It matters not," she said, her voice hard as tempered steel. "Whatever foul sorcery the Nexus has employed here, we will face it, and we will triumph. For the sake of all the free peoples of the galaxy, we must not falter now." As if in response to her words, the Nexus fleet surged forward, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent energy. The Allied ships opened fire, their weapons cutting through the void with searing beams of plasma and lances of concentrated energy. But to the horror of the Allied crews, the Nexus ships seemed to absorb the incoming fire, their grotesque hulls regenerating and healing even as they were struck. In return, the Nexus vessels unleashed a barrage of bioweapons, writhing tendrils of sickly green energy that lashed out at the Allied ships, eating through their shields and armor like acid through paper. On the bridge of the flagship, alarms blared and warning lights flashed as the ship shuddered under the onslaught. "Shields down to 60%, shouted the tactical officer, his fingers flying across his console. "Hull breaches on decks 12 and 15. Zara gritted her teeth, her knuckles white on the arms of her command chair. "Divert all auxiliary power to the shields," she ordered, "and get me a targeting solution on the nearest Nexus ship. We need to take these bastards down, and fast." But even as the Allied fleet fought bravely, it was clear that they were outmatched and outnumbered. The Vardari ships, their advanced technology proving invaluable, managed to even the odds somewhat, but even they were hard-pressed to stand against the full might of the Nexus's forces. As the battle raged on, a warning klaxon suddenly blared across the bridge of the flagship. "Admiral," cried the sensor officer, his face pale, "we have intruders on board. They're heading for the reactor core." Zara's blood ran cold. She knew all too well what the Nexus infiltrators were planning: to detonate the ship's reactor and take the entire fleet with them in a blast of searing atomic fire. She turned to Talon, her eyes hard. "Take command of the fleet," she said, her voice brooking no argument. "I'm going to deal with our uninvited guests." Talon, his face grim, nodded. "Give them hell, Admiral," he said, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. Zara gathered a group of her most skilled warriors, each one a veteran of 100 battles, and together they raced through the corridors of the flagship, the sound of their boots ringing on the metal deck plates. As they drew closer to the reactor core, the signs of the Nexus infiltrators' passage became all too clear. Scorch marks on the walls, the bodies of slain crew members lying in pools of their own blood, the acrid stench of burning circuitry filling the air. And then, as they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with the enemy. A squad of Nexus warriors, their armor a twisted fusion of organic and mechanical components, their weapons pulsing with sickly, unnatural light. Zara and her team charged forward, their weapons blazing, and the corridor erupted into a storm of fire and blood. The Nexus warriors fought with a savage ferocity, their movements blurring with unnatural speed, their blades and blasters cutting through armor and flesh with equal ease. But Zara and her warriors were the best of the best, each one a living weapon honed to a razor's edge. They met the Nexus charge head-on, their own blades and rifles singing a deadly chorus as they fought their way forward, inch by bloody inch. Room by room, corridor by corridor, they battled their way towards the reactor core, leaving a trail of shattered bodies and broken machinery in their wake. The Nexus infiltrators fought with a desperate fury, as if they knew that their very existence depended on the success of their mission. At last, Zara and her team reached the reactor core, a vast chamber thrumming with barely contained power. And there, standing before the pulsing heart of the ship, were the Nexus infiltrators, their hands already moving towards the detonation controls. "No!" shouted Zara, her voice raw with desperation and fury. She and her warriors charged forward, their weapons spitting fire, as the Nexus infiltrators turned to face them, their own weapons raised. The battle that followed was a blur of blood and fire, a desperate last-ditch struggle for the very survival of the fleet. Zara and her warriors fought with a savage intensity, their blades and blasters cutting down the Nexus infiltrators one by one. But the cost was high. Many of Zara's warriors fell, their bodies broken and bleeding on the deck plates, and Zara herself did not escape unscathed. A searing bolt of plasma caught her in the side, burning through her armor and searing the flesh beneath. But in the end, through sheer grit and determination, they emerged victorious. The last of the Nexus infiltrators fell, their bodies twitching and spasming as the life drained from them. The reactor core, its detonation sequence aborted at the last possible moment, thrummed with barely restrained power. Zara, her face tight with pain, her hand pressed to her wounded side, staggered back towards the bridge, her surviving warriors close behind. As she stepped through the doors, she saw that the tide of the battle had turned. The Vardari ships, their sleek hulls glinting in the light of the stars, had broken through the Nexus lines and were now engaging the enemy flagship directly. The massive organic vessel shuddered and convulsed under the onslaught, its hull rupturing in a dozen places, spilling forth a viscous black fluid that seemed to burn and corrode everything it touched. Zara, seeing her chance, barked out a command. "All ships concentrate fire on the Nexus flagship," she shouted, her voice ringing out across the fleet's comm channels. "Pour everything you have into that abomination." The Allied fleet responded with a vengeance, their weapons blazing, as they focused their fire on the stricken flagship. The barrage was devastating, the flagship's organic hull sloughing away under the onslaught to reveal a pulsating, grotesque mass of flesh and machinery beneath. And at the heart of it all, visible through a rent in the flagship's hull, was a figure that Zara recognized all too well, the Prime, the leader of the Nexus himself, his body fused with the ship in a nightmarish symbiosis. As the flagship died around him, The Prime let out a roar of pure, unadulterated rage and hatred, a sound that seemed to shake the very fabric of space itself. But Zara, her eyes hard and her jaw set, knew that this was their chance. "All ships, fire at will," she shouted, her voice filled with a fierce, unyielding determination. "Destroy that monster and his flagship, once and for all." The Allied fleet poured everything they had into the Nexus flagship, their weapons cutting through the void, like the scythes of an avenging god. And as the final devastating salvo struck home, the Prime's scream of rage and agony was abruptly cut off, and the flagship exploded in a blinding flash of searing white light. The battle was won, the Nexus's forces thrown into disarray by the loss of their leader and their mightiest ship. But even as the Allied fleet began to regroup and tend to their wounded, Zara knew that the war was far from over. The Nexus, though badly weakened, was still a threat, its forces scattered across the galaxy like a cancer waiting to metastasize. They would need to be hunted down and destroyed, root and stem, if there was to be any hope of lasting peace. But for now at least, they could rest and recover, secure in the knowledge that they had struck a decisive blow against the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The future was still uncertain, the road ahead fraught with peril and hardship. But with heroes like Zara and her allies standing against the darkness, there was still hope. Hope for a brighter tomorrow, a future free from the tyranny and oppression of the Nexus. And that hope, more than any weapon or ship or strategy, was the most powerful force in the universe. Zara stood on the bridge of her ship, gazing out at the stars as they streaked past the viewport. The battle against the Nexus had been won, but at a terrible cost. So many lives had been lost, so many worlds left in ruins. The galaxy would bear the scars of this war for generations to come. But even as they mourned their losses, Zara and her allies knew that they could not rest. The Galactic Council, once fractured and divided, had been united by the common threat of the Nexus. Now, they had to work together to rebuild what had been destroyed and forge a new future for all. Zara turned away from the viewport, her eyes falling on the holodisplay that dominated the center of the bridge. It showed a map of the galaxy, with the territories of the various races highlighted in different colors. The humans, the Rizians, the Elzanti, the Corva, the Jilin. All of them had suffered greatly in the war, but all of them were determined to rebuild. As Zara studied the map, a chime sounded from her console. She tapped a button and a message flashed onto the screen. It was short and cryptic, containing nothing more than a set of coordinates and a single word: "Come." Zara frowned, her brow furrowing. The coordinates led to a remote, uncharted system on the very edge of known space. Who could be sending her a message from there, and why? She considered ignoring it, but something about the message intrigued her. She had always been drawn to the unknown, to the mysteries that lay beyond the borders of the map, and after all that they had been through, a part of her longed for a new challenge, a new adventure. She made her decision quickly, her mind already racing with possibilities. She would take a small team and investigate the coordinates. If there was something out there, something that could help them in their efforts to rebuild the galaxy, she had to find out what it was. She called up Talon, her most trusted ally and friend. The Rizian had been at her side through the worst of the war, and she knew that he would not hesitate to join her on this new mission. "Talon, I need you to assemble a team," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "We're going to check out a set of coordinates I just received. It could be nothing, but it could also be something important. We need to be prepared for anything." Talon nodded, his eyes gleaming with the same sense of excitement that Zara felt. "I'm on it," he said. "I'll get our best people together, and I'll see if we can get some of those Vardari warriors to come along as well. They've got tech that could come in handy if we run into trouble." Zara smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for her friend's unwavering support. "Thanks, Talon," she said. "I knew I could count on you." As Talon hurried off to make the necessary arrangements, Zara turned back to the holodisplay. She input the coordinates from the message and watched as the map zoomed in on a small, unremarkable system near the galactic rim. "What are you hiding?" she murmured, her eyes narrowing as she studied the display. "And who sent that message?" She shook her head, pushing aside the questions for now. They would find out soon enough. For now, all that mattered was getting out there and seeing for themselves what lay waiting for them in the depths of uncharted space. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation that always came before a new mission. Whatever lay ahead, she knew that she and her team would face it head-on, just as they always had. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the stars snapping back into focus as the swirling vortex of faster-than-light travel faded away. Zara leaned forward in her seat, her eyes scanning the viewport for any sign of their destination. At first, all she could see was a field of stars, their light cold and distant against the void of space. But then, as the ship drifted closer, a planet came into view. It was a desolate, lifeless world, its surface a mottled grey and brown, pockmarked with the scars of ancient battles. "Is that it?" Talon asked, his voice tinged with disappointment. "It doesn't look like much." Zara frowned, studying the readouts on her console. "The coordinates match," she said. "This is definitely the place." She turned to the Vardari warrior seated at the sensor station. "Scan the surface," she ordered. "Look for anything unusual, anything that might indicate why we were sent here." The Vardari nodded, his long, slender fingers dancing over the console. For a moment there was silence on the bridge, broken only by the soft beeping of the sensors. Then the Vardari let out a sharp hiss of surprise. "Commander," he said, his voice tight with excitement, "I'm picking up an anomaly on the surface, a large artificial structure buried deep beneath the planet's crust." Zara felt a thrill of excitement run through her. "Show me," she said, leaning forward to get a better look at the sensor readouts. The Vardari tapped a few keys, and a holographic image sprang to life above the console. It showed a vast, sprawling complex of tunnels and chambers, all centered around a massive, spherical structure that pulsed with an eerie greenish light. "What is that?" Talon breathed, his eyes wide with wonder. "I don't know," Zara said, her voice tight with anticipation, "but we're going to find out." She turned to the pilot, a grizzled human veteran named Riker. "Take us down," she ordered. "Find a landing site as close to that structure as possible." Riker nodded, his hands already flying over the controls. The ship shuddered as it plunged into the planet's atmosphere, the viewports glowing with the heat of re-entry. As they descended, Zara felt a sense of unease growing in the pit of her stomach. There was something about this place, something that set her nerves on edge. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew that whatever they found down there, it would change everything. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, kicking up a cloud of dust and debris. Zara and her team gathered in the airlock, checking their weapons and equipment one last time before venturing out onto the planet's surface. As the airlock hissed open, they were greeted by a blast of cold, stale air. The landscape before them was bleak and barren, a wasteland of jagged rocks and deep, yawning chasms. In the distance, the entrance to the buried structure loomed, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to swallow the light around it. Zara took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. "Let's move," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "Stay alert, and be ready for anything." Together, they set off across the rugged terrain, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. The entrance to the structure grew larger as they approached, until it towered over them like the jaws of some enormous beast. As they stepped inside, the darkness closed in around them, thick and oppressive. Zara activated the light on her helmet, casting a pale beam into the gloom. The walls of the tunnel were smooth and featureless, as if they had been carved out of the very bedrock itself. They pressed on, deeper and deeper into the heart of the structure. The air grew colder and staler with every step, and the sense of unease that Zara had felt before only intensified. She could feel the eyes of her team on her back, looking to her for guidance and leadership in the face of the unknown. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking, they emerged into a vast, cavernous chamber. The walls were lined with strange, alien machinery, pulsing with the same eerie green light that they had seen on the sensors. And in the center of the chamber, rising up from the floor like some ancient monolith, was a towering structure of gleaming metal and glass. Zara approached it cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. As she drew closer, she saw that the structure was some kind of stasis pod, its surface frosted over with a thin layer of ice. And inside, suspended in a glowing green liquid, was a figure. It was humanoid, but unlike any species Zara had ever seen before. Its skin was pale and translucent, shot through with veins of shimmering silver. Its eyes were closed, but Zara could sense the power emanating from it, a force that seemed to fill the entire chamber. "What is it?" Talon whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. Zara shook her head, unable to tear her gaze away from the figure in the pod. "I don't know," she said, "but I think we're about to find out." As if in response to her words, the figure's eyes snapped open, glowing with an intense, otherworldly light. The pod hissed and cracked, the liquid draining away as the figure stepped out onto the chamber floor. It regarded them silently for a moment, its gaze seeming to pierce their very souls. Then it spoke, its voice echoing through their minds like a distant thunder. "Welcome, travelers," it said. "I am the progenitor, the last of my kind, and I have been waiting for you." Zara's heart pounded as the distress call crackled through the comm, the terror in the Corva colonist's voice palpable even through the static. "We're under attack, some kind of creature. It's tearing the colony apart. Please send help." She exchanged a grim look with Talon. They both knew what this meant. The Void's influence was spreading faster than they had anticipated. "Set a course for the Corva system," Zara ordered, "and ready a combat team. We are going in." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. The once thriving Corva colony, now a smoldering ruin below them. Zara and her warriors descended to the surface, weapons at the ready. The scene that greeted them was one of utter devastation. Buildings lay in crumbled heaps, fires still smoldering in the wreckage, and everywhere the bodies of the colonists, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. One of the survivors, a young Corva male, stumbled towards them, his eyes wild with fear. "It came out of nowhere," he babbled, his voice shaking. "A shadow, a living darkness. It consumed everything it touched." Zara gripped his shoulder, trying to steady him. "Where did it go?" The Corva pointed a trembling hand towards a nearby moon, its surface a sickly, mottled grey. "It fled there, after it finished with us." Zara turned to her warriors, her jaw set with determination. "Then that's where we're going. We're not letting this thing escape." Their ship touched down on the moon's surface, an eerie stillness hanging in the air. They made their way towards a hidden base, its entrance half buried in the rocky terrain. Inside, the corridors were dark and twisted, the walls pulsing with an unnatural energy. Zara's warriors fanned out, scanners at the ready. "I'm picking up traces of progenitor technology," one of them reported, his voice tight with tension. "This place is ancient." Zara nodded, a sense of unease prickling at the back of her neck. If the progenitors had built this place, there must be a reason, a way to combat the Void, perhaps. But before they could investigate further, a chilling shriek echoed through the base. Zara spun, her blaster coming up, and froze in horror at the sight before her. A vast amorphous mass of pure darkness was surging towards them, tendrils of shadow lashing out to ensnare anything they touched. Where they connected, flesh withered and armor crumbled, the very life force of her warriors drained away in an instant. Zara fired, her blaster bolts disappearing into the creature's inky depths without effect. It kept coming, a tidal wave of hunger and malice. "Fall back!" Zara shouted. Even as the creature's tendrils whipped towards her, she dove aside, feeling the cold rush of its passage, the stench of decay filling her nostrils. They retreated deeper into the base, the creature's shrieks of rage echoing behind them. Zara's mind raced, desperately seeking a solution. Then, in a chamber pulsing with dark energy, they found it, a device ancient and alien, thrumming with the same sickening power as the creature. A conduit, connecting the void to the physical world. Zara knew what they had to do. "We have to destroy it," she said, her voice grim. "Sever the connection, weaken the creature." But before they could act, the creature was upon them again, its power somehow even greater in the presence of the device. Zara and her warriors fought with every ounce of skill and courage they possessed, but it was like fighting the tide itself. In a last desperate gamble, Zara activated her comm. "All ships, fire on my location. Bring the whole damn base down on top of this thing." The ground shook as orbital fire rained down, the ancient walls crumbling and collapsing. The creature shrieked, tendrils of shadow lashing out in fury, and was buried under a mountain of rubble. Silence fell, broken only by the settling of debris. Zara picked herself up, every muscle aching, and stumbled to the device. It was still active, still pulsing with that sickening energy. She knew then that this was only the beginning. The void's power was still growing, still spreading. This had been a reprieve, nothing more. But it was a reprieve they sorely needed. A chance to regroup, to plan, to find a way to stop this darkness before it consumed everything. Zara gathered what remained of her warriors and made for the surface, leaving the shattered base behind. The fight against the void would continue. And somehow, some way, they would find a way to win. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. As the distress calls poured in from across the galaxy, each one more desperate than the last, Zara stood on the bridge of her ship, her face grim. The void's power was growing with each passing moment, consuming entire systems in its inexorable advance. They were running out of time. "We have no choice," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We have to use the singularity engine." Her allies, gathered around the holotable, exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew the risks. The engine was a weapon of last resort, one that would destroy not just the void, but the entire galaxy along with it. But as another distress call came in, the screams of the dying echoing through the bridge, they knew that Zara was right. The void had to be stopped, no matter the cost. "I'll assemble a strike team," Talon said, stepping forward. "We'll fight our way to the engine and activate it, or die trying." Zara nodded, her eyes meeting his. "I'm coming with you," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The journey to the heart of the void was a nightmare. The strike team fought their way through hordes of shadow creatures, their weapons barely seeming to slow the monsters down. The very fabric of reality seemed to twist and warp around them, the laws of physics breaking down in the face of the void's power. But still they pushed on, driven by a grim determination to see their mission through to the end. They battled their way through ruined progenitor installations, the ancient technology corrupted and twisted by the void's influence. And then at last, they reached the chamber where the singularity engine lay waiting. But as they approached, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, a nightmarish creature of pure darkness, its form shifting and writhing with malevolent energy. Zara and her team threw themselves at the creature, their weapons flashing in the gloom. But nothing they did seemed to have any effect. The creature shrugged off their attacks like they were nothing, its claws tearing through armor and flesh with terrifying ease. One by one the strike team fell, until only Zara and Talon were left standing. They fought back to back, their movements a blur of desperate speed and skill, but it was a losing battle. And then Talon fell, a cry of agony torn from his lips as the creature's claws found their mark. Zara screamed his name, but there was nothing she could do. She had to reach the engine, had to end this before it was too late. With a final desperate effort, she lunged for the activation switch, the creature's jaws snapping at her heels. Her hand closed around the lever, and with a cry of defiance, she pulled it down. The engine flared to life, a blinding flash of light that consumed everything in its path. Zara felt herself being lifted off her feet, her body dissolving into pure energy as the engine's power washed over her. And then silence, utter absolute silence stretching out into infinity. Zara floated in the void, her body gone, her consciousness a flickering spark in the endless emptiness. She was alone, the last living being in a galaxy that no longer existed. Grief washed over her, a tidal wave of sorrow and loss that threatened to consume her utterly. Trillions of lives snuffed out in an instant, entire worlds reduced to dust and ashes. But even in the depths of her despair, Zara knew that she had made the only choice she could. The void had been stopped, the galaxy saved from a fate worse than death. And though the price had been high, higher than anyone could have ever imagined, she knew that it had been worth it. As her consciousness began to fade, the last embers of her life flickering out into the void, Zara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had fought the good fight, had given everything she had to protect the innocent and preserve the light. And though her story would never be told, her sacrifice never known, she knew that she had made a difference, that her life and the lives of all those who had fought alongside her had mattered. With a final quiet sigh, Zara let herself slip away into the endless dark, her last thoughts a silent prayer for the galaxy she had loved. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video, then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.